The three green ones. Delineation.
Leverage office has advising me they're not going to be open until I've got like 15 now.
And then the orange one is the delineation that will.
We start communicating.
All right, I'm advised. All right.
One of the original.
Did you come straight here?
Yeah.
So that was a great experiment.
I was doing that. It didn't help that there was a contract that pulled out and he's texting as he's driving and I'm like,
I was waiting.
and then I see him. And I'm like, I look out, I see you turn, I go, yeah, I was like, all right, you go that way, I'll go this way, see who gets through it.
Well, I hit a couple of left turners, most of them.
That application was sort of
Get behind the excavator.
But is there one site that even change that number, like driver's ed vehicle identification record?
And even though we were very
Like 2 weeks ago, you positive?
What's that?
And you're positive?
I looked through. No, because
There wasn't like substantial.
no, because what happened was the original filing was for the bigger complex here,
Say hi to
but it was
me.
a plan set that showed no here. So all the information in this file related to these deeds, where they showed it on the plan. But they weren't looking for this parcel down here
Yeah.
as part of the phase that they were in. So they didn't give any information for that, it just existed.
It seems like for all the different that you go through like all the history of everything, that doesn't really seem like something to rush into approving information.
I think part of it here out there,
Mine's,
again this morning.
we're off and away every class every day,
I'm not sure if
so.
you look
Yeah,
at
I mean, mine
the
all
current conditions and even mucking it around, like you're gonna be able to
Somehow I
a better
right back.
Yeah.
which we can be involved.
Yeah.
Oh, one of those. What was yours?
we wanted it at
So I think that's
Because I would be suspicious of something if this property.
oh yeah. I just want to it's at the point where for us to go after, because right now we just
hello, Ernie. I've been asking
It was great.
she was coming out of school and I was like trying to cross the street. And I was like, oh, she'll roll. See who gets here
It
first.
really is. I think this is a great afternoon experiment.
No, she came in and left.
I know, it seems a little.
Ernie saw you walk in the door.
Yeah, no. Well, no, probably not.
Thank you, Andy.
Really quiet.
Alright. Action stations.
Ian, see, about the trees on Main Street.
Okay,
If he sees involved in that something.
really? I don't think so.
Okay, maybe not.
That sounds like fun.
Okay, moving up. All set?
Whatever you want.
Should I start? Sure, why not? Okay, let's get started for the Conservation Commission meeting for October 17th, 2018. We are recording, and if you're recording, please let us know. And if you could silence your cell phones, that'd be great. Public meeting to start with for public comment for items not being heard tonight. I see not, so we're going to the public hearing notice of intent. We have a few continuances. Mary D. Starr, 19 East Creek Road, Gregory Race, 19 East Creek Road, and Terrence P. and Patricia A. Morin, 70, oh no, pardon me. John and Carrie Walker, 112 Road is all continued till November 7th. And we have an amended orders of conditions. Sconset Beach Preservation Fund, 87-105 Baxter Road is continued to the 7th as well. So if anyone cannot be here for any of those and would like to have any comment.
Oh, and really quickly, it's not a continuance, but just to throw on there, since it's
Sure.
not listed on the agenda, the filing at 72 Millbrook Road has a file number of 3128.
Cool.
While we're there. So,
Get that pool in for the fall.
Paula, I think, has been on the phone with them all day, straightening out what it was. But it's in before the meeting, so.
Okay. So,
Or close enough there, too.
okay, well, we will be starting with that. So we're starting with Terrence B. and Patricia A. Moran, 72 Millbrook Road. Pleasure.
For the record, Paul Santos with Nantucket Surveyors representing the applicant, Terry P. and Patricia A. Moran, who are also the current property owners. So this is a notice of intent application for some additions and renovations to the existing structure. The existing structure is outside of the 50-foot no-build, and the work involved with the structure component is a portion of it's within the 100-foot buffer zone. That includes the small expansion of a porch on the northerly or front building face, and adding a porch to the easterly building section, and then doing some enclosing and some renovation of the southerly line of the building. All that work occurs outside the 50, but occurs within the 100-foot jurisdictional setback. The wetland line on the property is a bordering vegetated wetland that starts up around Millbrook Road and wraps around the backside of the property and continues off the property onto the property of Lee Dunn. Property to the south is owned by Kevin Deedy, and then our property is the 72 Millbrook property we're talking about. In addition, we're also asking for construction of a in-ground swimming pool on the property. This is a 20 by 40 pool, approximately at its deepest point, only about 7.5 feet deep on the deep end of the pool. Shallow end would be less than that. Has a surrounding bluestone patio hardscape. There is a small pergola component, a spa, and other features within the bluestone component. All those structural components are outside of the 50-foot no-build. The site is somewhat secluded. If you look at the photos within the property, if you look at the aerial photo, it's a secluded lot at the end of Millbrook Road, pretty much surrounded. It's in a mowed, unmanicured lawn area, if you will, in the back of the property that the Morans have owned for some time. Because of the remote nature of it, they are going with a safety cover component to the application, so there is no pool fence component shown on the subject plan. Due to the groundwater elevation, we are asking for a waiver from the 2-foot separation to high groundwater. We will be at that, at least at a small portion where the deep end of the pool is, we will be at or in the groundwater at that section, even though we're filling the pool itself a couple feet above existing grade from what's out there right now. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. There is a significant amount of property outside of the 100-foot buffer zone with regard to the area to the north for pool discharge, typical components that you would put in any of your orders of conditions. Property is north, if you look at it, north of Hummock Pond. Hummock Pond is to the south on past the Dunn property, and it's further to the south. Again, existing area does not require any clearing of vegetation. It's completely within a mowed lawn area. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. As Jeff had said, we did just receive our DEP file number for the project also, and DEP did not have any comments. We are outside any mapping under the Mass Endangered Species Act, so we did not require a filing with NHESP. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
I'm just curious as to what the depth of the groundwater is closer to Millbrook on the other side of the law. Do you have any idea?
Where is that now?
In the northeast corner.
Northeast corner.
Yeah. Behind the garage there.
The groundwater mapping under the town's mapping, the water resource mapping, shows anywhere from on the low end of the site to elevation 6 to the high end to 8. So it goes from about 6 or 7. So this site is probably around elevation 7, approximately around elevation 7 for groundwater. It is 6 on the low end. Believe it or not, just soil testing in these areas with regard to septics and stuff, the elevation of the pond does have a dramatic effect when you, I mean, it's almost like whatever the elevation of the pond is, typically you're going to see the elevation of the groundwater. When the pond drops, the elevation does go with it. But the map, Horsley-Witten map for that area shows the ponds down around maybe 6 and, like I said, 8 up around Millbrook Road. And that was consistent with, so we had some testing back that was done quite a while back in 05, and we had it at around 7, 7.5. And again, that was when the pond was, at that point, the pond was high at that time of year.
And Paul, were there any alternative sites for the pool where groundwater, distance to groundwater would not be an issue?
I don't think, in the back portion of the property, no, I don't think there's going to be any difference in that area. The septic is in the front, and you're basically along the traveled way of Millbrook Road in the front portion of the site. And from what I understand, because I did ask on the groundwater, apparently when they do experience groundwater with the pools, apparently it does affect the permitting from the building department. The pool has to be engineered. The pool components have to be engineered when they do have a close proximity to groundwater. And I believe they do have some type of valve system that they incorporate into the bottom of the pool itself, so there's not a pressure uplift when they deal with it. So when they do have groundwater, there is a building component aspect of it that does change with regard to permitting the pools.
Is this the silt fence you have X'd off?
Yes.
Okay. What kind of slope do we have here towards the wetland?
It's a minimal. You'll see the grades are on there. You'll see the grades. It's pretty flat. I mean, the existing pool area is about 11. And the wetland is down 10. As you start to go into the wetland itself, it's a pretty flat regime until you get down to the wetland area. Not significant at all back there.
So are you raising the grade where the pool?
The pool area itself around 11, 11.1, 11.2, 11.5. The pool's going to 13.1. Yes, so they are going to pick it up a small amount and then grade off from there. Yes.
And so this is all hard bluestone.
Yes.
I mean, is there any type of infiltration?
Well, the standard would be, it's not a
from the
concrete, it's that standard dry laid bluestone. Yeah.
I wouldn't mind a little bit of something for perking in here.
It would be shallow. I mean, we can do it. It would be a shallow component.
Yeah.
I believe, quite honestly, Jeff, I mean, we can.
Some type of a gravel or something.
We don't have there's no draft order or anything. I mean, I have a DEP file number, so I think we're going to be back here next month, next couple of weeks anyway.
Yeah, next meeting's the 7th.
The
so,
7th.
I mean, for issuance, I mean, we can.
So, or if you wanted to, if you had a condition that there's some type of infiltration, shallow infiltration for the.
Yeah, I just don't find
for the bluestone patio.
Bluestones are like impervious to water, and
that would, I'm sure that's.
So.
There is enough regime there, even to waters at 6 or 7, that there's enough shallow area there that we could do something.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I know that Lee Dunn's place has water issues.
Oh yeah.
So.
It could almost be like a very trench drain on the back side of that.
Yeah, gravel, something.
So no problem. I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah. Other questions? Okay. Any questions from the public? Okay. So if there are no more questions, so we're gonna continue for 2 weeks on this.
If that's the preference, yeah.
Well-
We can either close or make it a condition, or I'm happy to
But
continue.
You can
I
certainly
mind making it
condition-
a condition personally.
Yeah, you can condition that it has
Yeah. I don't need to
some sort of
drag it out.
filtration system to capture the runoff off the Bluestone patio.
Okay. So we have everything we need to close?
Yes.
And you would love to close?
Yes, please.
Have a motion?
Yeah, move to close.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Very good. Nantucket Point of View, LLC, 91 Lincoln Ave.
Oh, one of these is yours.
No, I think I had an extra one there, Jeff, so I. Did you
I'll take it.
those?
Oh, that's fine.
Okay.
Afternoon. Brian Madden from OEC Environmental Consultants, representing the applicant Nantucket Point of View LLC. The proposed project before you involves a renovation, relocation of an existing garage, a proposed pool, patio, with a fence, and reconfiguration of an existing driveway. Portions of the work activity occur within the 100-foot buffer zone to the top of the coastal bank. This property is located at basically the corner of Lincoln, Cobblestone. It does have some frontage off Jefferson where there's a lawn area. Flood zone comes across the lawn and hits a moderately steep slope. So by definition, the point at which the slope ceases to be 4 to 1 is your top coastal bank, which is an existing lawn area. So all the proposed work activity is on the landward side of the house, landward of 50 feet. Just a small portion of it. It's all within existing development conditions. So, yeah.
The hill, the former hill.
The former hill.
That is correct.
Any questions?
So, just to clarify, the proposed garage is just the existing garage moving?
It's being reduced in size and just kind of renovated. Yeah, so the garage is being moved out 700 foot.
Well, on the right side of the house.
No side.
Any questions from the public? Okay. No other questions from the commission?
Yeah, can we condition it that they allow the lichen to grow back on the pebble dash?
Sure.
That's inside the 100, I see.
A little bit of milk, I understand, we'll encourage that. Jeff, we have everything need to close?
Yes.
Like to close?
Wait.
The motion?
Motion to close.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Very good.
Thank you very much.
Bel Air Nominee Trust, 9 Willard Street.
Those guys down there.
For the applicant, Art Gasparo, I'm before you tonight with a notice of intent down in Brant Point. We're located entirely within the flood zone, and we're also within the 100-foot buffer zone to a bordering vegetated wetland. The proposed project is to enclose an existing first floor deck to make it interior living space. There's no change in footprint of the structure. I question, but I guess I would say out of cautiousness, have asked for a waiver because it is structure within 50, but there's no increase of the structure. It is just a change, as well as because the work, we filed notice of intent because the work is within the flood zone. So I don't know whether you determine a waiver for within the 50 is required or not. I leave that up to you. I would think that the structure, given the footprint is already the same, wouldn't need it, but if you decide that it is, I believe it would be justified. in terms of no adverse impact. And you can see I included in the plan the neighboring structures, so how much closer they actually are to the resource area. And that's the extent of the project, is to, and we included architecturals. And the existing second story would stay a deck as it is, it's just to enclose it. Oh, thanks.
Sorry, I didn't mail it.
That's okay, thank you.
So, currently, the second story deck isn't like lined to prevent water from reaching the first story deck, or
It may, or I don't know. I don't know whether there's like a membrane or something. Probably is, but I didn't look at the structure that closely to see whether you'd get wet on the first story deck, or if they've done something to, you know.
Because then, you know, that'll certainly change.
Yeah, I mean, it would become, you know, perhaps impervious, but again, I would bring your attention to the, you know, surrounding structures, as well as, you know, the relative square footage of, you know, the changes, essentially the width of the gaps in the deck.
Yeah, but the surrounding structures were built before the wetlands were protected, right? Well, this is a classic example of mission creep, irrespective of the surrounding structures.
I mean, I would say yes if they were asking, if I was here with the proposal that they initially suggested, which was a porch off of this, you know, this enclosed and the deck, then I would say yes. I didn't think that would be approved. So in this case, I would say the structure really isn't creeping. I mean, it's already, it's 2 stories of deck, and they're gonna have some living space on the first.
When was this?
83.
83.
83, I looked it up. Well, I don't know about the deck, but the structure is 83.
Yeah, so when was the deck?
It may have been
Was
with
it
the house.
permitted with the structure, or was it just added to the
Yeah.
back?
I was curious if there were conditions way back when.
I didn't really
Yeah.
go back. I mean, I could get more information if you feel that it bears on the application, you know, as proposed.
Yeah, I mean, hard to say what the commission was like in '83. Priorities.
Is there a foundation under it, sir?
I would say it's piers.
Yeah.
Piers.
It's all flood zone, obviously, so
Yeah.
it would have to comply.
Right. So
Right,
piers,
and then,
or is it on the table whether with the foundation
With flood vents.
With flood vents? So if I'm worried about
That's kind of interesting.
water, or lack thereof, I would think that if that porch had some sort of membrane that channeled into a downspout, you'd end up with the same.
Right, if that were the case, it would sort of be the same effect.
Right, but if it doesn't have a membrane, then we will be impacting
I mean, you could always,
water.
I mean, I don't know if we
Wanna
can
get
get
under
into
there.
something like that, but
yeah.
I mean, I'm interested in when the deck was permitted.
yeah.
If it was permitted with the original house and allowed, great. If it wasn't, then we're truly allowing structure
Yeah.
within the 50.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious if there was any comments about the deck, if there would be any record as to what their thinking was back then. I know, do you got an idea, Jeff, of
I mean, it's
what we might see?
I would say going back to it, you know, if it was constructed in 1983, the standards were very much different
Yeah,
then and now. I'll even be fair in saying that there's really, until the 90s, filing wasn't as regular as it is today.
yeah.
It's not uncommon to find a lot of these structures that don't have permits, or it was something that was constructed pre-Wetlands Act, and then renovated afterwards and wasn't picked up.
Well, we could check in the building department when it was actually added, which I did not get around to doing.
I mean, I could check the building department files and your files, but I suspect of, you know, 83 vintage that either the wetland along the backside wasn't even identified. You know, most likely. I'm speculating, but I could verify that. You know, the question I guess would be, is it how material is it in terms of that the structure footprint exists? That, you know, we're not changing a patio to interior.
Right.
You know, we're not changing something that falls under your other category of landscape feature or something else in terms of the way that the commission, the regulations define structure. It's equivalent, right? It doesn't really define a difference between a pervious and impervious structure, right? A deck is considered equivalent under the definition of structure as an impervious or enclosed area.
Well, except that it isn't.
Well, I would say in terms of the definitions that it is, but in terms of evaluating impacts, that I agree. There's a difference because if you look at the hydrology as we're discussing, the question becomes then with a change of area, does it result in an impact to the interests protected by the commission? And I don't think that it does. I think that it literally is a runoff change that at most is only different by the width of the gap of the deck boards, right? Because it's still, and now some of it might go straight down under that area and at a distance of 43 feet or so, you know, from a resource area. And I didn't calculate the exact area of the deck, but you know, it's under 200 square feet. I just don't know that. I'm not trying to
and again, I mean,
minimize, other than to say I don't believe that, you know, in terms of protected interests, groundwater, flood protection, when there's no changing grade, there's no new steps coming off of the house. I mean, I included the architecturals. Perhaps it helps to look at those. That I believe that, you know, the project meets your standards. I believe.
Yeah, I think we just have to look at it as structure for structure, and then what greater impact does this structure have, if really any does, you know.
right, I'm not totally against it. I'm just trying to, I was sort of thinking just if there was any comments, any thoughts back then, but I guess you're right. I mean, 83 was pretty, even the building department was not quite up to speed with the state at the time.
80s were a little more Wild Westy.
Yeah, it was.
I think groundwater would be just at a couple feet down.
I was just about to
here,
think
the
about
pond
that.
The wetlands just.
It's probably pretty
It's
wet.
about at maybe 2.5 or 3, maybe just a little less than 3.
Yeah.
And this thing's at what, 5 or something, so it's probably just a couple feet to groundwater. So I mean, I was thinking infiltration chambers, but what are they going to give me sitting in a puddle? So that wouldn't make any difference. I mean,
No.
infiltration's going to be bad here no matter what.
Right.
Yeah, when the White Elephant put that cottage in on the corner there, on Easton Street, they were pumping water out of there 24/7.
Yeah. So it's probably wet soils anyways. Okay. Other thoughts? Questions?
I'm just uneasy, but I mean,
Oh, I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
it's hard to disagree with you, Art.
Yeah,
know?
it's not.
It's,
No. Okay, well, I'm gonna open it up to any comments from the public? No help. Okay. Okay, well, we have everything we need on this one, Jeff?
Yes.
well, the one thing we don't have, but I'm not sure that.
Do you, well, is there, okay, good, pardon me, good point.
Well, we don't actually know if it was part of the original structure.
Okay.
But I'm not sure that.
Yeah, I know.
But that's a good enough
Find that
reason.
out.
Yeah, let's get the timeline of the project.
Yeah,
I think it
okay.
makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay.
Yeah,
So I'll just continue in 2 weeks and get you whatever information that I have.
yeah.
3 weeks, I think, right?
Yeah, it's 3 weeks this time.
Yeah.
We skipped the Halloween meeting. Can I ask a quick question, just because I'm curious, because if it's something we're gonna start asking for regularly, we can kind of put out the edict before we continue here, is, and I hate playing devil's advocate, but if it was constructed in 1987,
Mm-hmm.
what impact does it have on the performance standards? Because we permit a ton of projects that we don't ask for
Yeah.
chronologies on. Is all of our rules and regulations tie back to how things relate to the interest and performance standards? And I just don't want to open up a Pandora's box of something that we're going to start requiring, or require once that we are not going to require a different time. Because I get fearful of those moments, because that's how you start getting into arbitrary decisions.
Right, but I mean, I totally agree with you, but here, we want to check whether or not it turns out that the deck was put on in 2006 or something. So I don't want to set a precedent where if a deck is added, much later, then that it can then become part of the structure, and from the point of view of being impervious and having a roof on it. So that's why I'm curious as to when the deck was actually built, because I don't want to set the opposite precedent, that anybody can come in, even if it was just built 5 years ago, and ask for it to be covered. So that's sort of why I'm asking.
That's a good point, except I think we need what's the cutoff date,
Yeah.
Of when these regulations were most certainly in place and would have had to go through permit.
Well,
Right.
the local wetlands bylaw was 78, the state is 72. Admittedly
Close.
so, I don't necessarily think
That's
the
pretty
full
close.
breadth and scope of what we see today was in effect during a great deal of that time.
Right.
I mean, you could see just the number of filings aren't
Right.
that substantial.
Well, so to follow then, if we find out that this deck was built without a permit, or without at least a content approval, what are we gonna do about it? Is it gonna really change
Well,
the
certainly,
outcome? We're gonna make it rip it off?
No,
Maybe we are.
no, I mean,
we couldn't make it more structure, certainly.
Yeah, I think it would be unfair to ask to have it ripped off, but I think it would be
No.
perfectly reasonable to say, leave it the way it is.
I think you sort of get into that 10-year or whatever it is sort of grace period where they, after a certain
Right.
period, they let it go if it was never brought up.
Right, well, that's true.
So,
I mean, my point, I only brought it up, and I'm not necessarily opposed to it, I only brought it up, I was just kind of curious, but reality is it's far enough back probably that there probably was no comment or no way of getting the thinking of the Concom at the time when this was done. That was the only reason it was floating in my head. I wasn't necessarily looking for I don't necessarily consider the underside of 2 stories of deck to be a extreme habitat. It's all latticed off. And then as for the water infiltration, yeah, I mean, you close it up, you have all that area not perking. Although you could build the thing on piers and sort of have the same.
It will be.
Yeah, it will.
Either that, or
Right.
it could be on, like you say, it's the floodwaters are going to be able to go underneath there.
Floodwaters will have to go through it.
But, then in 2 years' time, they'll want to put a second floor on. I mean, that's, I think.
Right, but at that point, it really doesn't matter because it's like you've already, the
Right.
infiltration's gone. Other than pissing off your neighbor, it's not going to really affect us so much, I wouldn't think. Yeah, I totally agree. I don't want to get into setting a precedent for all these things, but it is an interesting point. We've had this happen before, and we have allowed them closing in decks. North Liberty.
Yeah.
well, I mean,
That was right in the wetland.
the definition of structures for us specifically calls out, and it doesn't distinguish between decks and buildings, and I know it's always been one of those things where you go the other way and say, well, how is a deck a structure and a dry lake patio not a structure,
Right.
when they're arguably both,
The same.
I would say semi-impermeable, I guess, because they don't really let it off, but they're specifically distinguished, and it's something that I think if you're generally assumed to be a structure, you're assuming to have certain impacts as a structure, and that's why you have a regulatory difference.
Yeah.
More, probably more of a fun,
Detailing, yeah, the detailing for me is what I'm more interested in. If it's on piers, I think it's a better detail.
Yeah, I mean, with the piers, I think it would
Less
somewhat
impact.
simulate
Yeah,
the
it's a fun, I agree.
pre-existing.
Yeah, agree with that.
I just want to make sure we're applying the rules.
I know what you mean.
Evenly.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
I think in my mind I was thinking being respectful to the previous board and some mysterious thinking that probably doesn't exist.
Well, I think if we're really concerned about runoff, we would have to know what percentage of the water that goes on this deck actually goes through those boards versus
Yeah.
runs off the ends.
And yeah,
And then we're talking about that difference, not the, and you know, given the shallow depth to groundwater and in big storms, it's probably not rainfall we're worried about so much. It's gonna be floodwaters.
yep. Yep. Well,
I think I'm back to, I just don't, regardless of what I might find, if we put this off for 3 weeks, is it ultimately going to impact the decision of the board in terms of that we haven't changed the footprint of structures, of the structure under your regulation?
Well, it's the old saw art that, you know, even a dog knows when it's been kicked on purpose. I mean, there's a difference between habitable and uninhabitable structure, and I feel that, you know, and I'm just repeating myself, but, you know, I would like to know when it was actually built. So it would impact my decision if it was built in the last 15 years. And I think it should stay as a deck, rather than ultimately become an extension of the house within the 50 foot, from my point of view.
Actually, the same.
You know, I think, I just wanna make sure it was permitted, but also then knowing what currently is lining the second floor deck, if anything. So does water fall through and soak those boards? Because, you know, the wooden boards actually do take a little bit of water, you know. Like, what are we actually looking at here? Because that will change somewhat the water infiltration.
It will change, but I wonder how, I mean, when is it a significant enough change to worry about? I mean, there are small enough changes that I don't know that are worth, you know,
If it wasn't within the 50-foot buffer,
then we wouldn't have jurisdiction, so.
No, we would have jurisdiction within the 100, but we wouldn't be having this discussion if it was outside the 50.
Structures would be allowed, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I just don't know if we wait 3 weeks, regardless of what I find, what changes or difference that it makes. I understand it does for Commissioner Golding, but in terms of the regulations and the performance standards, the regulations don't differentiate
decks.
habitable space versus deck. It falls solely under the definition of structure.
Right.
And that's what the waiver is. And so then it comes back to your performance standards, which is there an adverse effect on the protected interests? And I don't see that, and I think it'll be, you know, like we say, it's at that distance. Maybe I'm repeating myself, but I think it's only fair to.
I think I get it. I understand.
I'm always happy to try to provide the commission information that you want, and not just push something through or be seen that way. But I also don't want to just take time that it really, if it's immaterial as to what's found, you know, in the decision you may reach, because according to the regulations, and we look at the definitions, and then we evaluate the application based upon the performance standards and the interests that you're charged to protect. Does the project as proposed, say, even if it's, let's assume a worst case in terms of that it's that it's a deck that allows water between the boards. It could even be a tight, you know, butt joint deck. I'm not positive. It
probably is. A lot of these in this kind of area are more like mahogany, tight joint, not even the gaps. So, you know, but let's just for sake, I think, of discussion and evaluating the performance standards, that it's the worst case with a 1/4 inch gap or 16 penny nail. Does enclosing that, the difference in the amount of water that would perhaps flow off of the deck, and taking it in context of the surrounding area, have an adverse effect on the protected interests? And I don't see a protected interest that is impacted.
So there's a couple hundred square feet of deck.
Approximately, I can't
Yeah.
give you an exact number, but
I mean, 1 inch to 10.
yeah, it's the percent change is very small.
Well, I know what you're saying, yeah. I tend to probably I probably wouldn't change my decision personally, having the information, whether it was, you know, any further information on the deck. Let's put it that way.
And, yeah, as far as the performance standard goes and the increased impact, I don't see any increased impact. And I'm not even sure that legally we could, you know, say, if the deck was put on, you know, in the last 15 years, is it punishable by not allowing them to not put on their structure for structure addition?
If it was completely unpermitted, then yes. If it
I
was permitted,
think they
I
actually
don't
have
know.
I think they have there's sort of a time period where that works.
10-year rule.
Yeah,
I would
what do
like
they
to think
call it?
so, I just don't know if it is.
Yeah, like I do a legal structure, not a house, but say a shed or something, or a deck. 10 years later, the building department usually writes them off.
Right, that's an MGL statute that
Yeah.
then was adopted at town meeting last year as well for our
Oh,
local
really?
regulations. And there's also one of the attorneys, if I
Yeah,
get
no,
with them,
no.
could address, but there's
Not
a
a-
6
not-
and
not
a
really.
10-year.
Right, not
But
that
you
it,
have to have enforcement,
right, not that it affects
but I don't know
our
exactly.
regulations.
Right.
But
I mean, it sounds like we've got 4 of you who are a go. So
yeah,
Mark wants to
that's
close.
sort of,
I think
that's
he
sort of
knows
what
the way
I'm,
this
that's
is
sort of what
gonna
I'm
go
getting at.
about
I get the
information,
point, but
so,
I think we have.
It's a sticky one, I
I
don't
don't think it's going to change.
No, I don't like it either, but it just seems like the effect on, in this case, in this situation, seems pretty small to me. Given that there's already a lot of coverage over the ground there. And again, I don't know when it was built, what the permit status is, but it is there now. I mean, if there was nothing there, it would be a totally different story, but there is
Right.
a structure there, and if I thought we could infiltrate the runoff, then that would be something I think we should do, but I don't think we could infiltrate it here.
I don't think you
there's
could.
room to infiltrate here.
I don't think you could.
I agree.
you'd have stormwater planters or something on this
Yeah.
2nd floor deck. You know, there's certainly some things you could do.
Yeah, I mean, you could put
To help
gravel.
the water.
You could do something
It
simple.
could be a small green roof deck to infiltrate the water.
Mhm.
You know, so there are definitely things that could change to make it a little bit better.
Right.
But again, that's
Grass roof and go.
Way cool.
I guess I'm just curious, what's the extra water gonna do? That small amount of extra water, what is it gonna do?
but if it's a small amount here and a small amount there and a small amount there, then it's a big amount, you know? So it's just each property we have to look at and say, is it changing the water infiltration?
Right, I mean, it would be very simple to somewhat, the downspout, it's gonna have a roof. And to run it into, you know, some French drains or something.
Sure, I mean, we could.
I
we
mean,
could
it's
do
really, you're
something
not
shallow.
gonna, like I said, because it's shallow. I mean, it's probably affected by the tide down there and everything too, so. You're lucky to have 1.5 feet of,
I would think
space.
that, you know, almost 50 foot along to the wetland, it's gonna absorb that little bit of extra water. Given our, I mean, I don't know what the soil is like down there, but given what I know about Nantucket, stuff goes in pretty fast.
Yep.
But that ground's probably gonna be saturated pretty fast, but it's probably saturated really fast now too.
Well, I'm getting the impression there isn't a an overall interest in knowing the history of this one. Or we'll change, I should say, change the opinions on their votes. So why don't we close this one? Personally, I think might be the best way to go. Jeff, we have everything you need to close on this one?
You have all of the required.
All right, like to close? Okay. Do we have a motion?
Move to close.
Second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you.
So that passes with Commissioner Arisman and Golding opposed. LHVN LLC 109 Mill Point Road.
Good afternoon, Mark Ritz from Site Design, representing the applicants at 109 Heel Point Road. This afternoon you have an application before you to install sand-covered planted coir fiber rolls along the bank fronting 109 Heel Point Road. The proposed installation site conditions are very similar to next door at 103 and 105 Eel Point Road and 101 Eel Point Road and 93 and 99 Eel Point Road. A similar erosion rate of about 1.5 feet or so per year, similar bank height, similar beach width, and the proposed installation is the same type of coir fiber roll, anchored coir fiber roll covered in sand and planted, that was recently approved at 103, 105, 101, and a little further back at 93 and 99, and also sometime in that general time frame at 121. Basically, it's the exact same type of installation. We do not have a pre-78 structure on this property, so we are not proposing the fence, just the fiber planted fiber roll array. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
How far away is 40th pole?
40th pole is a good ways away. I'm not sure the exact distance, but it's pretty far.
Mm-hmm. And is that the delivery point?
That is the equipment delivery point. The sand delivery point will likely be either done in conjunction with the 4 or 5 neighboring parcels, or it will be done via mats and conveyor, most likely on the east side of the property where there's a little bit less vegetation and whatnot, and a little less topography to disturb. And we're talking about essentially the same amount of sand cover to compensate for the the typical annual erosion rate, same monitoring protocols that were approved on recent adjacent projects. The only difference with this one again is that no fencing in front of this one.
What was that, Jeff, question? Is that 25-foot top of bank? Is that a no disturb equipment? No disturb for equipment, no disturb. I mean, I'm just worried about the sand delivery on a lot of these, really.
You guys can certainly, if you feel like that's going to be an impact, you can certainly require that to happen, then they'd simply have to conveyor it over or find some way to mitigate that impact or bring all of it in via the beach.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know which, that doesn't seem like realistic, but I've been thinking about these projects, and the sand delivery component of it just seems really impactful going forward.
It can be conveyed that last 20 to 25 feet without much difficulty. I mean, there would likely be one set of supports for the conveyor somewhere in that that 25-foot stretch, but that would be it. You wouldn't have the truck traffic.
Yeah, okay.
Because delivering the quantities of sand we're talking about you know, long-term, delivering it from the 40th pole would be a tremendous
Yeah, no,
amount of
that'd be worse.
of beach
Yeah.
traffic, and
Yeah.
would likely be worse, but we can, you know, if it will make the commission feel more comfortable with the project, we can certainly have it be conveyed over the edge so that the disturbance is minimal and will be almost entirely outside of the 25. There'll be just, you know, a small footprint for actually staging the conveyor, which will not be, you know, high impact. It won't be truck traffic that, you know, pads will go down, feet will go down, and then, you know, you'll have a couple small areas that might need a few plugs of beach grass to restore them, but you won't have the truck backing up to the edge.
Well, I think we should really start conditioning.
That's a good idea. A lot of these banks in this area are nicely vegetated too.
Yeah.
A lot of shrubby vegetation and
Shrubs and dense beach grass tend to be pretty extensive here.
Yeah. Other than that, I don't personally have anything else other than
kind of a typical
arguable stuff.
project here.
Yeah.
So the properties to the north are protected, right? Well, I guess that's north. Yeah. West, depending on how you look at this
I
map.
believe that's
These?
just got, I believe that, I believe the one to the west of us has
Something.
sand-drift fence. I believe that's all that it has. I'm not
Okay.
sure that it's had any other protection.
Yeah.
I know that 121, which is a little further down, has been authorized for the same type of installation.
And then we got this was
one is
approved.
approved, this
Yeah.
one is approved,
Yeah,
and
okay.
this one is approved.
So, gap.
You can actually see the machinery on the beach in one of these photos.
Right, and of course, it compacts the sand.
Yeah.
Affects the megafauna. And, you know, have we discussed
these
a
are getting
failure
huge.
criteria? In other words, if they end up getting stripped of the beach grass so that you're down to the basic choir tube, then we could define that as having failed in a storm because it's not providing enough sand to the littoral system, and so it should be removed.
Well, I think most of these do have that failure criteria in them.
You do?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
The issue is they don't fail and then have to remove it, they have to come back into compliance, is what ends up happening. So
Right, but I'm saying that
Right.
we should start defining a failure.
Well, the
if it's-
plantings become part of the failure. If the plantings don't hold, then it's
Right,
failure.
but my point being that
Right.
if they're stripped, then if they hadn't been there, additional sand would come out of the bluff. So in
Mhm.
other words, it is essentially starving the beach, the littoral system of sand.
Mhm.
And so I think we need to tighten up the failure criteria of these.
Well, we always talked about revisiting the rules on this one because there's so
Right.
many of them.
Right.
We haven't gotten around. We haven't done rules for a long time.
you know, we need to get at that.
I know, we're gonna start smacking your hand. and
Yeah.
you're gonna get to
Let's
leave
start meeting
here.
every third Tuesday.
Every Saturday we'll show up.
Don't even
Your
start
house.
with Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point. These are such becoming large structures. I mean,
Yeah.
Well, all right, we probably do need to tighten up the failure criteria.
we do. It's just a matter of, and it does. I mean, they really are.
So
Have all the issues of a.
typically the procedure's been for a failure, right? If you reach a failure, can't even say it. If you reach a failure criteria, the remedy hasn't necessarily to bring it back into compliance, but it's to appear before the board to decide what action is most prudent. So if it's something where the board then chooses to remove it, because we always put that as a caveat that including removal, then the board can simply order it removed as part of that failure criteria. If it's simply a adjustment or a bring back to compliance. But the way most of our failure criteria, glad I said it that time, have been structured before is it's to come back to order action.
Mm-hmm.
And we always put in the removal as a choice because that way if you guys choose to do it, no one is like surprised that was a choice, but it always is.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it allows us to sort of say, all right, well, it wasn't possible to cover it up for a time or something because there was like a series of storms or it wasn't. But if, you know, something sits uncovered for 8 months, it's another story, right?
If I may say something, I know that on similar projects around the island, typically, what I believe typically has been happening is that if there
you know, part of the design is that we have sacrificial sand, and if it's recovered, re-brought into compliance, or even if it's revisited and it's determined that perhaps a greater quantity of sand cover needs to be put out there. I understand it's totally different if it sits uncovered for months and months on end, but I believe that on a lot of these before, sort of the typical approach has been to try to bring it back into compliance, perhaps just the volume of sand if need be, but part of this design is that, you know, this sand is intended to be sacrificial, but we do have a component that is trying to hold some of the bank to provide some stability. And, you know, if we don't have the Quar rolls there or the former Quar bags, you know, it's just pure sand placement. So we're trying to balance having a little bit of protection with a nourishment component, and hopefully the nourishment is often frequent enough and done quickly enough to roughly balance what would be typically lost from the bank in typical conditions. So.
Yeah, I mean, also, one of these things, because these are, I'm not sure how easy this would be, given different agents representing different clients. These are all becoming one large structure, so, I mean, we should be looking at the effects of these as a whole now, as opposed to individual ones, because you're not gonna see one individual property's effect. And it should be looked at more like one big project. But this is one of those areas that's becoming a chain of. So it's gonna be, I mean, like I said, I'm not sure how you do that with different agents representing different clients.
You really want to watch the beach.
Well, exactly. Look at the whole beach
in front of the project
and the wings and everything.
And on the edges,
I mean,
you know, what's the downdrift?
Yeah,
like?
we're not gonna really be able to tell.
I mean, one advantage to this project over, say, a typical, you know, geotube that's just a hard structure is, you know, these are staged up a little bit, and they do have vegetation cover, so that may slow down some of the storm take, and that may help and mimic a, you know, a more of a natural bank effect of, you know, not all the whole, you know, the bank doesn't lose 3 foot in 1 or 2 minutes, it takes the whole storm. Maybe this helps slow it down enough that at least we have sand going in for a period of time. And I mean, if they're adding the average annual component every year, then in theory, we're mimicking the natural, you know, the natural loss over time. Again, it's not the same loss, you know, it's per storm the same loss. And you know, where we really lose the bank is in these monster storms that take, you know, I mean, you know, most of that loss in a lot of places on the island happens, you know, once every 10 years or so. And then you've got many years where hardly anything goes on a natural bank. Then you get the big storm and bam, you lose a lot of feet.
Right.
And, you know, I'm not an engineer. I don't have an idea how to engineer that into one of these projects. But, you know, I mean, I would hope somebody who's a, you know, a geoscientists might have some ideas on how to make one really work like we'd like them to work, but.
Well, I think part of that comes into keeping the structure covered.
And vegetated, I think, too.
Yeah, but to sort of speak about how to more closely mimic a big event where it takes all of it, then it needs to be covered again, so it's available immediately. So I think that's really the only way that we can.
And that's going to get harder and harder as there's more and more of these. How are they going to get them all covered?
No, I mean,
there's going to be a lot of effort.
And I think we need to think about the impacts to the beach over time, because during a big storm, the beach takes a huge hit, right? And then the beach itself would be recovering after the storm, but it can't, because then we have construction vehicles and sand delivery. So our natural beach ecosystem doesn't have time to recover from this. And we need to think about the foundation of that ecosystem, which unfortunately isn't sand grain size. It's also the mixture of the different components of these bluff elements. You know, that's the foundation of the ecosystem, just like good soil in a garden. If you keep starting with this, you know, same size but different chemistry, the beach ecosystem is never fully going to recover from this stuff. So, I mean, I think over time they are going to have an impact we can't measure.
I don't know what the impact's gonna be, especially as a whole.
Yeah.
This project.
Well,
No, I mean, I agree absolutely with what Ashley is saying, and I think we're all on the same page in terms of the rest of how we deal with it going forward. But I wanted to point out there's a minor inaccuracy on your application, because I believe the patent is no longer pending.
Yes, the patent is actually, it went into effect after we submitted the
Right.
plans.
Right.
But yes, but I believe that is the case. If I may address just a few of the, particularly what Commissioner Steinhauer was asking about, the sand contribution that's placed on initially is approximately equal to what the average annual is for this area. So if that's taken in one storm, it's taking about what gets taken every year. And then if there are multiple storms, if there's need to re-nourish, recover, we're actually putting in more into the system than is taken in a typical year. So we're sort of mimicking those larger or repeat or more energetic years. The other thing with these coir fiber rolls also is that if there is that monster 10 or 15 year storm, these are coconut fiber rolls. These aren't like a solid, more solid geotube type structure. These will actually have some failure to the fiber rolls themselves in really big events. They're anchored, so they're not going to be floating free, but we've seen that they get undercut and they might settle, and material from above and around them will also enter the system if we are talking about one of those sort of wow storm events. So there is some accounting for the bigger events, and it is difficult to really deal with that. I mean, but there is some consideration in this design for that.
right.
I wonder too, with these sort of stair-stepped and rough surface coconut logs, I would think they would have a lot less tendency to reflect wave energy. They should absorb a lot more of that energy, since it's got to kind of run up through the steps and then run back down through the steps, instead of just bouncing off a wall that's especially slanted, so it's bouncing it right back onto the beach.
And if you've ever felt these, they're not that hard. They have give to them as well. So they are, physically they're compressing a little bit if they're struck with wave energy. They do have some give to it. They are absorbing a little bit of energy, because it's just the coir fiber roll filled with coir fibers. So it's not a very, if you stand on one and bounce up and down, you feel some give, at least when I do. But I'm heavy.
Okay.
Would you show us how you test them, please?
Well, there's some on a trailer in the harbor. We can go after that.
Go play with that one.
Well, trailer at the steamship, not in the harbor.
Okay.
And real quickly, just to add, for those who remember, when we discussed the little array at 101, we added a new condition to the kind of the condition package that we've been putting on these, and that was a condition that requires the recovering of the structure within 21 days of the event that caused it to become uncovered, and they can get an extension from that 20 days only upon written request to the board requesting that extension. So you guys have started to set a time limit too. If it uncovers, you have 21 days to recover it, or else if you don't, you haven't requested an extension, you're moving into failure. So that is a new condition that we just added in for the first time. Last time we saw a similar application. Couldn't remember if it was one time ago or 2 times ago. One time ago.
Okay, were there other thoughts and concerns? Okay. Thoughts from the public?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Emily Molden for the Nantucket Land Council. Just a quick question and comment about the nourishment material. I was just looking at the narrative, and I think it says that after the installation is completed, it will be covered with 6 inches of the beach compatible sand. I didn't actually see in there specific documentation for this site of the erosion rate and what that annual volume would be. And I know that this has been done on adjacent properties and it's probably not different at all, but I do think it's important for each filing an application for that to be provided to you guys as far as what that annual contribution rate would be for the file, because some of the orders of conditions I've seen reference what was provided in the application, and I just didn't see it in there, so I think it's important to have that on file. And then also, I think we've talked about this before, but clearly the likelihood is that there's going to be a contribution of more than that if the initial covering is equivalent to an annual contribution. But it also seems like it would be important to have it conditioned that at a minimum that's provided every year. So that if there's a year where there's very little storm activity and they don't even become fully uncovered, that they're still, again, providing that annual average every year, even if it hasn't been uncovered, because then the idea is that maybe you're over contributing, but then in a subsequent year you might under contribute, and that's sort of the idea of the annual average. So just something else to think about having in these, just making sure that, again, it's unlikely that it would ever be an issue, but just that it says in your permit, at a minimum, that annual average should be contributed once a year, whatever that volume is. Thank you.
Thank you. Other thoughts? Okay. Jeff, we have everything.
We are still waiting for
no.
Well, and I think we need that added, and he's got a sound point. We're
Yeah.
getting a little casual about
Well,
this.
yeah. No, I mean, that we do conditions for sure.
Right.
I think we just assumed that that's
right.
On something. We're getting so many of these things.
We can certainly, since we have to wait for Heritage till
Right.
the next meeting, we can certainly put together a memo detailing the erosion rates and volumes.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we'll provide that for the
Okay.
next meeting.
So, would you like to continue?
Like to continue
the
with
7th?
3 weeks?
I guess the 3 weeks, yeah, the 7th. November. Oh my God. Okay, well, we will continue to the next.
Thank you.
Thanks,
November. Okay.
But you're not rid of me yet.
Yeah.
For 3 more in a row.
Okay, man, it's so nice out.
Yeah, we've had hesitation.
Okay, Michael S. and Christina Elizabeth Jemison, 195C Hummock Pond Road.
Did you say 195C?
Yeah.
195C.
Way down. Good afternoon. Once again, Mark Ritz, Site Design Engineering, representing the applicants at 195C Hummock Pond Road. The project before you is the result of an enforcement action. At some point late last winter, early this spring, there was some brush cutting and grubbing which occurred on this property inside the 100-foot buffer up to the wetland, and in a few locations just a few feet across into the wetland boundary. The removal of vegetation was rather extensive. The extent of the wetland was delineated by Brian Madden and of LEC, and Brian also put together a restoration planting plan. And what we are here with tonight is the restoration planting plan. We have some detailed notes on the plan and also a narrative included from Brian in the application detailing the planting density, types, spacing. But what we're proposing to do is to replant the disturbed wetland, replant the entire 25-foot buffer, replant 50% of the 25 to 50-foot buffer with an appropriate mix of wetland vegetation in the wetland and buffer zone vegetation in the buffer zones, again as indicated in Brian's narrative. And we're proposing to keep, there's currently a silt fence up in place at the edge of brush cutting. We're proposing to keep that in place while vegetation is reestablished, and basically we want to, fix this violation and get everything squared away back to how it should be.
So, question. Step 3 of your restoration measures is to rototill the restoration area to preserve the native seed bank. I usually think of rototilling as disturbing soil more and causing potential for soil erosion, kind of destroying what soil structure would have been left there. So I'm wondering about the rototilling and then applying 6 inches of organic topsoil, because that seems like nutrients right to the wetland.
Did that all get stripped?
It got stripped down to sand.
Oh.
It is, you know, unfortunately, parts of it are sandy moonscape.
Hold on.
And I've got
Pretty
Brian
astounding.
here to,
It really is.
So in that photograph I did include, you can kind of see the lay of the land. So there is some vegetation in that seed bank germinating, but you can see there's no topsoil there. That was stripped. So while taking advantage of some of the native stuff already there, that's the reason behind the rototill, but it's going to need some organic topsoil for the plantings and seed mix. There is no invasive species around the area. This is all native stuff, just regenerating, but simply letting it be and adding seed is not going to stimulate the same level of growth, I think, and especially for the and around the plantings, we're going to need some organic stuff.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, as a penalty, we could specify native poison ivy all the way up to.
But we did specify the
Colorful.
under number 9.
I think the poison ivy will find
permanent
its way there
markers.
quickly.
Yeah, that'd be a permanent marker.
So, I always worry about what's, you know, the
It's astounding.
soil that's available and what it might contain. So, we have to figure out some way to
We don't have,
grow out a little of the soil, or I don't know if that's even open.
there's nothing locally available that's not tainted.
Alright stuff, but
We're
there's
looking-
some really bad stuff too. You know what I mean, Brian? I mean, there's just so much crap about that's getting sold here. All kinds of knotweed and
The stuff from
we've
the
been here
dump.
before. What's that?
The stuff from the dump.
Oh,
No.
yeah, no, not the dump
So,
site.
there's piles of like brush and debris. What actually happened to all the soil that was there? Because I'm surprised that there'd be brush left if the soil was taken from underneath it. Like, how did that occur? Or did they really not strip as much soil as we think?
Brian did, you know, auger holes and whatnot there, so he could speak to the soil. I was brought in after this occurred. I don't know what occurred. I don't know what it looked like before, other than from aerials. I don't know what the soil conditions were like before. So I really, you know, I'm here to try to get this thing fixed.
Well, I'll say, as someone that was out kind of, I don't want to say right after it happened, but after we had reported it and were able to go out and see it. And I think Brian's picture, you can see it just a little bit. And I agree, I was kind of struck by the piles of brush that were there. But the thing that kind of clued us in on it, one is, it's just bare sand. There's no organics at all on the top part there. But if you look at the picture, you can see there's a really abrupt break in slope from where the lawn came off before and it met. And it kind of just dropped and went. And it didn't seem like a natural break, that there was something that had gone missing before. And it almost had created kind of like a little bowl edge on the one side. So material definitely left. How much, I don't know if we'll ever know.
Maybe you gotta use
But,
it to build up the lawn, you know?
Well, how about stripping the soil from the other end of the lot as part of the condition? So that'll be, that'll be perfectly healthy soil. It'll be the same type of soil as they stripped close to the wetland, and it's a large lot, so have them provide the soil from another part of their lot.
Well, then you just take it away from up on there. That's nicely vegetated. But
Well, it looks,
Well-
in this aerial,
I think if you certainly wanted to, I mean, you could certainly tie it up by saying that, as much as I hate to say, you're looking at it as a restoration, so you can set up a success and a failure, and saying that the presence of invasive species, when you come in for your certificate of compliance at the end of 3 years, they're there. You can't get your certificate of compliance. So if they get bad soil, if they have a huge thing in knotweed, well, now they have a huge issue on their plans that they can't close out their permit because they're dealing with it.
Maybe just a condition that the source of the material needs to be vetted by Jeff or staff, just so it's not spread before it's.
What depth did you want to?
I'm not gonna be able to see it.
How do you feel
Fair
about
point.
flower just on your desk for a few weeks? Throwing out, seeing what grows.
Okay.
And I would just say that the amount of slash that's currently stockpiled is probably a very small percentage of what had been previously there. So.
How deep were you gonna bring into topsoil?
6 inches max, but try
That
to
sounds
minimize.
really like a lot to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. For native plants, they shouldn't need.
Yeah, they shouldn't
Yeah,
be much, just a little bit to get the seeds going and.
Yeah, it's
So
probably.
you're proposing 2 to 3 foot tall bayberry, right?
Yeah.
3 foot centers.
So I'd say like maybe 2 inches on average around the shrubs, but maybe at the root balls, upwards of 6 inches.
So maybe we need to specify that so that the whole place doesn't get 6 inches. It's
Yeah.
just gone.
Certainly, yeah, you don't want that lip on that.
Plenty of
My
area
other
where they
question,
could take it out.
any way
put
they
it
would
back.
add in some more shrub species diversity for
Yes and no.
in the BVW? Because my assumption is that it wasn't just Ilex verticillata that was cut down, but probably some other important shrub species.
Yeah, the only reason why we kind of left that pretty minimal, it's just this little sliver, but we can certainly add some more species.
Yeah, the actual incursion into the wetland itself was
Small.
pretty small. The buffer was
Right.
stripped out, but the actual wetland incursion was, not giant.
And most of the shrubs that we select within the buffer zone, are technically wetland plants too. So.
Yeah, this area has a lot of clefra as well.
Yeah, we could certainly add that to the mix because there is I think we shied away from that because there's a lot of it immediately close by, and lesser of the other shrubs.
Was there ever a delineation done when the structure was built and renovated? Or showing of existing vegetation line or anything, do we know?
I
know you guys are coming late to the party, but it
I
seems like.
believe there was a plan on file for a delineation, an older
Yeah.
delineation. I don't remember the date exactly.
So having looked at it, the older delineation shows the wetland being slightly more towards the pond, was under the older criteria for soil, and it has moved out since then.
Well, I'm just wondering if he's creeped over the years of cutting more and more vegetation, if he's gained more lawn as well. So I don't know if that was ever, staked, like this was a line of vegetation.
Yeah, so that when this originally came in, we looked at briefly, and I think that, not to drive anyone to the packet, if you see in the packet, if you look at the aerial photos, which are pretty distinct, we compared that area of lawn to the original, and the area that's left as lawn is pretty close to the area of the original.
They were trying to expand the lawn.
Yeah,
and
this-
this happened.
No, I got that, but I'm just making sure that over the year, he's not taking a lawnmower.
No, it
lawnmower.
hasn't been anything
Okay.
substantial.
Other questions?
I think we just have to also make sure that, we want to limit phosphorus fertilizer down, given the condition of the pond with phosphorus already.
Yeah.
Really all fertilizer, but especially phosphorus.
I don't know, I know it's only a 3-year permit, but it says to conduct monitoring on a yearly basis for at least 2 growing seasons. And I feel like we'd wanna do that for the life of the permit.
Yep. Absolutely. So, and just to throw out there, if it's commercially being applied, phosphorus is prohibited without a soil test. And they haven't filed one with the application, so I'm gonna go out and say they probably don't have one at this point. And given the current landscaping practices being used, I am pretty confident that this is not a someone who did this is doing soil testing.
Oh, they're definitely.
I just know that
there's no soil
Buy a
left.
plant
If
home,
this-
just throwing it down.
if this topsoil is augmented with compost, the thing we found by looking at compost types when we were doing the fertilizer regs is to get, you know, adequate nitrogen in compost, you've always got too much phosphorus. Compost tends to be richer in phosphorus than nitrogen, and so if they're making this topsoil by adding compost to get the organic matter up, then they're likely enriching it with phosphorus as well. So
if you wanted, I mean, just to play that out condition-wise, I think if you're concerned about the contents of the topsoil that's being spread, is they could provide one where they're sourcing the topsoil from, but then also requiring chemical analysis on that soil prior to its installation is probably something that would be pretty feasible to do. And if they're having to source it, I mean, those soil tests are, I think UMass is charging what, $30 now? Are they up to? They're pretty cheap.
That's quick.
And you can get it pretty quickly, but then I think everyone would know what you were looking at, and then they would have a soil test, and if they said, well, we need a little bit more phosphorus or something to augment those soils, they would have that information, and that could be something that could be required in the order. I don't think that's, I think that'd be in total keeping with our rules.
Do it. Soil test.
Okay. Other thoughts?
I think you use a different soil lab.
Open it up to
Yeah,
the
that's
public.
a good idea. But typically
Public
25 or
comment?
30 bucks a test.
Any
Yeah.
questions from the public?
Jim Hardy, I'm with neighbor.
Hey Jim, come on up.
I was down there when the whole thing took
Could you come up to the front for
When
the
whole
microphones?
When the whole thing took place, and there was no material hauled out other than trees and brush.
Mm-hmm.
So what's there is what material was there on the ground to plant in, what it was growing in. They've also encroached 20 feet across the property line and cut down 7 or 8 to 10 inch cedar trees that are on our property. So I just wonder if that falls into this or somewhere else.
Have you discussed it with your neighbor about replacing your
Haven't seen it.
cedars?
No,
Haven't seen them?
Father called, left them a message, and then that was that. So, I mean, it sounds like to me like they want to haul loam in plant lawn, which was the original intention, but there was no material taken out other than the brush, because I was down there, the landscapers were cutting, stumps are still there in some of the places. So, I mean, just.
Right, I'm curious what the soils are on there's a lot
Has
down
anybody
in
been
that
able
area.
to look at it, other
Yeah.
than pictures? I mean, just, all you gotta go is look at it. See
Yeah.
what's going on. Sounds to me like they want to add a lawn that's.
Right, yeah, right into the
Yeah, it
wetland.
wouldn't be a lawn. The restoration won't be.
Won't be a lawn.
Won't be a
But certainly if nice cedar trees were lost, those should
So,
probably
you
be
can
in a
see, you can look
replanting
at the old
plan.
photos and the new photos of the,
Yeah.
that's something we'll handle later on, I guess.
Yeah.
So you're saying you lost cedar trees on your property? Well, how can we address that?
So part of it is on our,
Well, they'll be putting it
like
back.
that's part of their
I do believe
restoration is on.
Right, okay.
Yeah, I believe your area is notated. Part of the restoration area on your land.
Well, actually, we can see it right here. This is your property, right?
Where's
It's gonna be this one.
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah, this piece here, and the trees that were along here.
Yeah. I think if possible, could you call us at the office tomorrow? And we can set up a time and we'll meet you out specifically on your property and discuss what remedies you're looking for. And then we can certainly address it through there, and then we can be sure we see it. I was just looking for carbon icing to be out.
And I
so.
think, you know, our plan is to restore
Thank you.
what was done on our property and
Yeah.
restore what was done. Certainly, you know, part of this was showing what was done within jurisdictional areas on that property, on the abutting property, and I think that, you know, the applicant is represented by Richard Wooden, and I think that, you know, discussions between the parties, you know, they want to make this right again. So, but I'm only, you know, today discussing the jurisdictional replantings basically, and the other issues they can certainly address other venues.
So would Jim have to come in and sort of act as a violation that's been committed on his property, and would that be just like this sort of happened before on other? It would be treated separately, I guess, for.
It can be, but that's something that you can simply do under the original enforcement, because
Yeah.
that still hasn't been released, and can condition, but it's something that, we have many mechanisms to take
Yeah.
care of. But I think we'll meet with him specifically and go over the site specifically and find a remedy that's satisfactory, and I think it's probably easier and less onerous on them as a property owner who, you know, other than owning the property, didn't do anything wrong or do anything on permits, to simply take care of that through the enforcement and order it done. And you can order it done by the violating party, and then obviously have the current property owner, one, consent to whatever action is gonna happen, and then also kind of have a final stamp on we're satisfied as well before they're released from that part of the action. So that's something that is certainly within your legal ability to do.
Okay.
That's why we showed restoration within that portion on the abutting property, assuming that in these discussions and discussions between the parties, there would be some sort of consent agreement where they would authorize us to fix on their property to their satisfaction on the commission's.
Yeah. And if they have any, you know, personal want to pursue some sort of other personal claim with them that it's outside of our purview, that's their business to take care of.
So when they grubbed the property, they pulled all the roots, they pulled all those stumps out. It's a hard idea. There's still stumps on yours. So it'd be able to get an idea of how many cedars or.
Yeah, and there are lots of, you know, historic aerials that can be looked at as well.
Great, yeah.
And just, you know, on the abutting property, we showed full restoration within the 100-foot because it was before, and, you know, we don't want to.
Perfect. I mean, you go on the GIS map, it shows them clearly.
Yeah.
Yep.
2014, I think they were taken.
Okay.
Yeah, we were using a current aerial to show the extent of the operation.
Unbelievable. Okay.
Side by side.
It's one I'm happy I walked into after.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So is there any other comments from the public? Okay.
Just let me take a look. Just pass this down. Take a look side by side. It's actually kind of interesting.
Oh yeah. You got rid of those two. Yeah. Oh yeah.
And you can definitely see the cedar.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And so many next door.
Where did the topsoil go?
Well, I honestly, when I have bare soil at my house because the Nantucket has such sandy soils, it only takes a few rainstorms for it only to look like sand on the top.
Oh, that was that's what I was wondering.
You know, like it surprises me every year. My garden right now looks like it's all sand. Right. In reality.
And you do have the slope up behind it that's washing down into that.
So my feeling is they didn't truck off a lot of sand.
That's why I was curious about checking the neighboring.
Did you pour this stuff, right?
What's that?
You took core samples out there, did you say?
I didn't take any for samples, though.
Okay.
Yeah, I did.
Did you
Yeah,
take
when I was arguing, yeah.
There's just nothing.
I mean, there is, but you know, as Ashley was just saying, I think a lot of that may have bleached out, but you know, we've gone through a full growing season now.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like what we might call topsoil or organic is really thin.
Yeah,
At least in my yard, it's really thin.
Oh yeah.
and looking at the aerial too, it looks like over in this location it was more like a sandplain grassland type habitat, so you wouldn't expect a whole lot of topsoil at that location.
Okay.
So you're gonna change it, like tweak your plan a little bit, and
We can condition it with add cedars to it.
less topsoil.
Yeah, I think that's kind of just like an infield adjustment based on. I mean, once you rototill that, you may not really need a whole lot.
I don't like rototill.
I
I don't think it's
for this
appropriate
soil.
for this location.
Yeah.
It's already real airy and
I would say no to the rototilling.
What are you worried it will do, or what do you?
So rototilling increases soil erosion, and whatever soil structure would still be there, it loses it. So if you have fungal mycorrhizae in there, anything that would naturally be in that soil, if you rototill it, you're destroying that structure. So when you talk about soil conservation, rototilling is something you don't want to be doing, generally speaking.
Gotcha. And you, so any depth, or can you adjust the depth
maybe
on
just
it?
scratch the surface a little, but I wouldn't even.
I wouldn't take a rototiller through there, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it does
'Cause
take
I don't know
years to
why it would be
develop that sort of
compacted
bio.
that you would need a rototiller.
Yeah.
We'll adjust the plan accordingly.
How,
Yeah.
how it by hand?
No, just dig the plants right in there, yep, right on the top.
Got you.
Just bring the seeds, or if they're gonna plant lawn grass, they'll probably use the water application, but.
There's no lawn proposed.
Yeah, no.
Oh,
All right,
going in
so
that area, okay.
it's- So no rototilling, field adjustments around the plants for depth, proper depth to ensure survival of the plants, and then lowering the depths for any areas that are seeded. Is that what we're sort of after, when field adjust?
And then just this,
And then the
adding
cedars.
cedars, yeah.
Yeah, and the testing of whatever material.
Well, if you guys are telling me, then I think those are all things that you're probably right into in order to do.
Mhm.
I mean, I didn't draft it all, so you can simply draft it to look like that.
Yeah.
And then I think the adjacent property where the cedars are issues, I think that's easier to just do under enforcement and just require it to be done. And then, you know, that they would have that on them with the date to have that done by, and then stay engaged with that property owner that has that to make sure that it's satisfactorily restored before releasing them from that enforcement action.
Mhm.
If it takes 6 weeks or takes however long to get it to the point where everyone's satisfied with it, that's however long it's gonna take.
Yeah, I feel like you'd need a growing season if you're putting cedars in. You don't want them to plant something that dies over the winter after you release them.
That'd be bad.
Yeah. But I think it's something when we meet on
Yeah.
your site, we can kind of go over expectations and what they want, and we'll have a better idea. But I think that's better handled through the enforcement.
Temporary irrigation.
Yeah, we had spec'd out removable stands.
Great. Okay.
And I think Little Blue Stem would do pretty well down there, just,
Yeah.
I've had real good luck in my yard, just going and collecting
Sticking it in.
seed and spreading, just throwing it out there, you know, and
Yeah.
it's really increased in the yard. And,
You just go to the front yard.
yeah.
That's right.
They get their soil and receipt.
That's
I
what
don't know
the
how you
boss
get
said. Strip your back.
Pennsylvania
Well, that's-
said,
Put it in your bag.
if you have bugs or how you start that.
Yeah, mine, in my herb, really, you can almost cut off sections of others and make little plugs.
Okay. Okay, we got everything. Other happy? No. So Jeff, we have everything you need to close on this one?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you guys like to close?
Yes, we would.
Okay, do we have a motion?
Yeah, move to close.
Do we have a second? All in favor?
Very much.
Thank you. Interesting. Teddy Bloomer LLC, 94 Tom Nevers Road. Teddy Bloomer.
That was a happier one for you.
Isn't it?
Hopefully mine are getting less controversial. Move through the evening.
I know.
So too.
Think of where you started with us, and oh my God.
Once again, Mark Ritz from Site Design, representing the applicants at 94 Tom Nevers Road. This is a property that the commission saw a little while back. We received an order of conditions permitting a house, pool, all the various typical Nantucket development items that are all outside of the 50. What we are here with before you this evening is a request to put in a set of beach stairs down the bank, a path through the buffer zone, and a set of beach stairs down the bank to the beach, and a little bit of boardwalk on the beach / dune to get access over some vegetation, basically so that we are gaining access to the beach in compliance with local requirements to have access over a bank and over a dune be via elevated walkway. We're proposing a sort of typical nominally 12 to 18-inch elevation for steps and boardwalk, just give some room for things to grow underneath. We are going down through an existing gully on the property to sort of try to minimize impacts. Installation will be done with typical, hand tools to dig the posts. We're not proposing any
extraordinary equipment in here. It's, you know, fairly straightforward set of beach stairs.
So there was always a path going down the bank there, it looks like.
There was kind of an exaggerated deer path. It was navigable if you didn't mind bleeding a little bit.
Yeah, well, yeah. Given the car tracks, it must have been like one of the few accesses you could get down.
So Mark, I think I remember reading that you were going to trim the vegetation underneath the boardwalk, at least initially, to get the boardwalk in, or the steps.
Yeah, you know, we don't want to clear cut. We just want to kind of
top them a little,
top
them
them
enough.
Yeah, and then you know, hand dig the posts and just top them enough to put the decking in. We don't want to clear cut the swath down the bank.
I was going to recommend, that you only trim them enough so that they're just below,
underneath the decking, so just kind of minimal disturbance to what's there, so that it'll stay hopefully happy, healthy, and growing.
And the boardwalk on the bottom, is that elevated?
Yes, that's elevated.
And what's it ends on the beach then?
Yeah, it's basically there's a vegetated. If you look at the aerials, there's a fairly extensive beach grass and a little bit of shrubs on the backside of that dune. So we're just trying to get over and across that without disturbing it too much. So 12 to 18 elevation, you know, high enough that it gives growing room, but low enough that we don't need to start having railings.
I think elevated walkways are the best way to go for a situation like this. Rather than having people walking in there.
Question, when you look at the aerial, it looks like, and I know this is coming from an adjacent property, but there's an established path already on this side.
That's
the other lot.
This is us, the red one.
Yeah, see that, they don't have an aerial of the house that exists in that.
Yeah, the aerial doesn't feature the
that
work
too.
started recently, but it's not there yet.
Not there yet. Next series.
Yeah, Google doesn't take pictures that fast.
Is the grade sort of conducive for that ravine to sort of be problematic?
We've got this is actually a to scale cross section. So we've got a steep upper portion in that ravine, and then it's actually relatively flat down the middle, and then there's a little bit of a steeper portion closer to the dune. So we've got that's actual grade there. So it is actually fairly conducive to doing this without changing the grade any.
Yeah. Is this area eroding already? I mean,
No.
I'm curious as to why. I mean,
no,
it's just old runoff.
I think it's an old feature. The bank is very thoroughly vegetated. It's shrubs. It's all, you know, this high, and there is a pretty wide dune in front of this thing, and at this point a pretty healthy beach. So this area has not been eroding in recent history.
Okay.
I won't make any future predictions, but it is currently a rather stable bank, very well vegetated.
And what are the dimensions of the landings?
The landings are going to be about 2 feet cantilevered out over the sides of the nominally 4 foot wide path. There are, I believe, some elderly family members that have a little bit of trouble with navigation, so it's just a little bit of an area to kind of pause, and it's going to be cantilevered. It's not going to have additional posts, so it's just going to be the same posts for the regular stair width.
Is there? So they're gonna terminate at the beach, and then they'll still have to walk through like this small area of dune.
But this is all, you know, we've got our edge of you know, kind of dune vegetation, so we're trying to traverse the vegetation and get us out into open sand. And then, you know, and then we feel that there's really no point in having further elevated walkway. So we get past the vegetation, we're not disturbing it, and we're into open sand.
So I'm assuming all these will be dug by hand.
Yes.
Driven.
Crane.
Yeah.
No, this will be hand dug, and as Ernie recommended, we're gonna, you know, vegetation, not clear it out, so kind of minimal disturbance. I mean, there'll be a little bit of disturbance of guys, you know, tromping through there.
Right.
Keep it as minimal as possible. And we are following a, you know, sort of existing path, so it's gonna be minimal
Yep.
alteration.
And what, now I've lost my place, sorry, what material is the steps gonna be, the
106.
railing's gonna be?
106 is a diagram.
We're proposing everything wood.
4x4s, pretty small.
4x4 posts, you know, 2x6s, 2x8s for
Yeah.
the
Framing.
framing, you know,
Yeah.
fairly typical, you know, wood railings, you know. I don't know if they're gonna go with cedar or not, but it will be wood.
So it's gonna be the only, so it's gonna be quite obtrusive in the sense that there are no other walkways going out there with railings, so it's really gonna change the appearance.
Well, the stairs are gonna have railings, the elevated boardwalks will not, and we've intentionally put this in that existing gully on the property to keep it down low and largely out of sight. Most of it will be within the gully and within the screening of existing vegetation. So, and the only railings are on the stairs where they're required because of the elevation. The walkway is unrailed.
I noticed that, thank you.
This is kind of a question for Jeff and you. For whatever reason, I'm nervous about where these stairs terminate when I look at the aerial, and that's sand, but still within the dune. Is there any way you can monitor to make sure that like they're just not setting up their beach equipment here and causing destruction to that dune area? Because you know, when you look at this, especially if I had mobility problems, that would be a quite tempting place to kind of set up. And in reality, that's still kind of part of our dune field.
Well, the photo you're looking at there is a
It's kind of dirt.
about 4 years old. It's you know, when the survey was done there, we tried to pick up excuse me.
Just kind of set up
Yeah,
each there that they continue.
They're gonna come out this area.
Right.
I mean, we can extend it further if that's something that the commission would
No, I
like,
just
or
don't know if it's something that can be done with, you know, monitoring the area.
Well,
You just don't want.
Condition.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd have to condition something that does that. I mean, it's hard to condition something. I don't think we have a legal basis to put a condition in that says you can't have your beach picnic at the bottom of the, you know, at the end of the walkway. I think you can try to condition something that, some sort of monitoring component where you'd be looking at, you know, the health of the beach vegetation kind of in the area there, and, you know, trying to condition something or having a finding that says, you know, or even a condition that effort shall be made to minimize impacts to beach vegetation from the use of the stairs and walkway, and then try to point them out there. But I don't think you could try to put a condition on their recreational use after they finished using the structure.
I think in this area, if you look at the topography, we are talking about a coastal dune that is sort of, you know, we've got a fairly even grade down to the water. You know, there are occasional scarps when there's erosion at the beach, but we're talking about a beach that's grading into a bank gradually, and the area that we're calling dune, we're largely calling dune more because of the established vegetation on it. We don't have sort of a classic, you know, here is a large mound of sand at the back of the beach.
I mean, the elevation definitely goes up and back down.
But this is you know, within the sort of scarp. This is the scarp zone where the beach / dune is. At the time of the survey, you know, I think we did this back in early spring, when you have that, you know, you walk out on the beach and then suddenly you drop down 3 feet and you're on the rest of the beach. But this area, generally, when it's not in a stormy condition, is a fairly gradual slope. We don't have sort of the classic mound dune in the back. This is just sort of gently ramping up towards the bank. So we're making that distinction more on vegetated upper beach area than we are on sort of a typical dune structural morphology.
Other questions? Other thoughts? Any comments from the public? No. What else is here?
I think we're still waiting for Heritage on this one too.
On this one,
Because the boardwalk section runs into Heritage.
yes, we are. I forgot exactly where the line was on this one. Yeah, the end of the boardwalk is within Heritage, so we have to wait for them. So we'd like to continue to the next meeting, please.
Okay, we will continue for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Thank you. Okay, we're going into request for determination. I can't pronounce that. Okay, Christopher Fiumara, 67 Eastman Street.
Should have pulled up a chair. Once again, Mark Ritz from Site Design representing the applicant at 67 Eastern Street. This is a property that the commission has had some experience with in the past. What you have before you this evening is a request for determination with a local jurisdictional wetland on the property. The wetland was delineated by Brian Madden of LEC. I met on site this morning with Jeff and Joe to review some of the soils work that was done, and I believe Jeff was in agreement with the delineation before you. The delineation is only for the parcel in question. We have stopped at the property boundaries and have not gone onto adjacent properties. And as you can see from the plan, the shaded area is what we are calling local jurisdictional wetland, again, just solely under the bylaw.
So I'll just confirm that we did go in and reviewed both the data forms and a couple additional locations on the site, and kind of agreed with the soil conditions under the local bylaw. I know there's been kind of a history of wetlands being present and not present and different information, but current site conditions are reflected accurately on this plan.
Okay.
At least in our opinion.
Well, that's a wetland.
Well, if it's been verified by staff, I would say
Yep.
to,
Yeah. The 2A, what is it, a positive 2A? Yeah, we just have to take, if there's any comments from the public.
Yeah, for sure. Any questions or comments from the public? Seeing that, Jeff, do you have a recommendation?
Yeah, I would recommend it, and again, to also add into, in this request for determination, there's this portion, but the site is also entirely within land subject to coastal storm flowage as well. So our recommendation on the positive 2A would be for land subject to coastal storm flowage and a isolated vegetated wetland under the local, but I think I would also put a caveat that depending on the totality of the resource area, if you get offsite or over, that there's a potential for that vegetated wetland status to change to bordering if it gets to be big enough. But
How far are we from that meeting that criteria?
well, that criteria is a minimum of 5,000 square feet, and we're significantly away. But with it being open-ended, it would at least be locally jurisdictional, but I don't want to, if that was ever captured in totality, that the potential could be there. But I'm kind of doubtful, but That's what's on the ground now is isolated vegetative element.
Okay. Okay. Oh,
Can I actually just ask
please.
one question? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Emily Rosen for the Nantucket Land Council. I was just wondering, on the file, there was just one set of data sheets for soils that were done at one of the wetland flags, and I just wondered if that's all that was submitted, if there were additional cores done at the other flags, and again, just confirming that that was evaluated by staff. But I just didn't know if that was only done at one flag, or that was just what was submitted to the file, and if it was done.
Sure, so that was submitted. I know there's a more extensive report. I know we confirmed there at 5 pretty extensively, and then also at again at 8, 9, and 10.
Okay, great, thank you.
And typically when we do those, if we find fairly consistent conditions from spot to spot, we don't necessarily double check every flag, because the conditions that we're seeing kind of within that same regime are close enough to be comparable, and they're usually distinctly.
Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
we can't hear.
What? Can't hear what we're
He's not
saying?
speaking loud enough. I'm the owner, in fact, we're the owner of the property.
Okay, could you state your name?
We can't hear.
We can't hear.
I understand.
Anything that he is saying.
Or anyone has said.
Part of it might help if you were in front of us, our voices are projecting that way, you're kind
I
of sitting
understand.
behind, which does make it more difficult.
Is there any possibility to repeat what you had
Sure.
stated?
No, I'm happy to say that, you know, when we.
Yeah,
You want me to sit?
Oh, please, sit. You can sit right up front. That'd be great.
Is when we are confirming that is we confirmed at multiple locations, and typically when we do that, if we find consistent soil characteristics from point to point, that we hold that line as being fairly consistent through those distances. So by checking those flags and in those locations, we felt that it was sufficient to verify that the wetland line is shown on the plan.
Okay. Have you seen the wetland, the delineation of the property?
Yes.
Okay.
We don't agree with it.
Okay.
Basically because of the fact that you've added, you know, depth to the state regulation when you adopted for free water. In this case here, free water was lower, wasn't found. It was between 24 and 30 inches, not 18. I was there when he did all the tests, okay? And then the other thing that's questionable is when you adopted, I guess it was in July of 2013, you had a meeting and changed rules because you had a problem, you didn't have proper definitions and so forth in your local bylaw. And now you've adopted the same setbacks that the state has, 25, 50, 75, and 100. And I don't know, I think it's easy to forget, but when those regulations were promulgated under 310 CMR, what they had in mind was property that needed to be served by on-site septic systems for those kind of separations, not a piece of land in the middle of downtown that's served by streets and sidewalks and sewer and water and electricity and everything else. So, you see what I'm saying?
Well, wetland delineations are wetland, soil delineations are soil delineations.
I know, but the other thing is, this as an isolated
Vegetative
inland
wetland.
right? It has no inlet except heavenly rain, like what we had last Friday, some pretty heavy rain. And the outlet is an approved under the state law when it was installed under the proper window, which started in 1996, an approved drainage system, which wasn't supposed to be ever called or classified as a wetland. So you can see the problems we have, because this is a lot that's valued by the assessors at $1.5 million.
Mm.
And now, have we got enough, with those crazy setbacks, have we got enough room for, you know, a dwelling there, a small dwelling? We have a permit for a 4-bedroom house there now at it's not a building permit, but the first permit you get is from the HDC.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, these wetlands tend to grow. I mean,
Tend to grow?
Well, there's more water, they tend, I know the ones on my property have grown.
You know, the whole of Grand Point is classified by the DEP as beaches.
Well.
And then, I hope you noticed in the report that the engineer noticed, and he's done other things in the Grand Point area. Of course, it's all filled land.
Mm-hmm.
You know, from way back, from when I was a little kid.
Yep.
And I'm 84 years old. In fact, I helped to fill it in on North Beach Street years ago when I worked for Al Silver as a kid, right? The whole right-hand side, you know, all filled in with an old Jeep and with a snowplow on it. It didn't have nothing to do with the garage. You went down there and pushed stuff back, right?
Please put that history in writing. Seriously.
I know the history of
I like it.
You know, of the area well.
Yeah. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I just wanted to make those comments for you, because especially the one about the extreme evaluation. And if we can't be used properly, then we got a problem, and we may end up having to, you know, challenge and go to court.
Totally understand.
So forth. And we've already had a couple of lawsuits. In fact, the property is under notification to the Board of Appeals for the last lawsuit that was there. Anyway.
Well, yeah, I understand. I mean, we tend to have to follow the advice of the consultants, because we're not wetland scientists. So,
if I'm not mistaken, you have the final say as far as, no matter what he says on where the delineation is, you have the final say on where the delineation is. You can move it around, right?
Well, we can.
Only if evidence told us that.
if we're following state regulation, that would be inappropriate for to sort of second guess.
Well, that wasn't what he said in the report. Maybe he's wrong about who has the final say over the man that did the
engineer.
The engineer that did the tests. You know. Yeah.
Well, Brian did the soils testing.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't recognize him. I was there.
We both have beards, but he's half my size.
Okay. Okay, I appreciate the comments. Okay, so you did make a recommendation.
For the positive 2A.
For the positive 2A. Would someone like to?
I move. So
make that
moved.
motion? Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that one passes unanimously. I totally understand. That passed it passed unanimous. The
So
delineation, we approved the
confirmed these
delineation. We
boundaries.
confirmed the boundaries of the delineation.
You turned it down?
No, we confirmed them. We confirmed them.
Oh, you confirmed
We
that?
confirmed the delineations.
What was presented?
Yes, confirmed, yes.
Okay.
But I understand where you're coming from. So. But thank you very much for commenting. Put him under the bus. Okay, where are we? Okay. Ted Godfrey and Joyce Jaskula, 325 Pulpus Road.
Gasparo for the applicant. before you tonight with
Actually,
a
wait a minute.
request for determination of applicability to confirm a portion of the vegetated wetland boundary on this property, and then to hopefully have a finding that notice of intent is not required for work within the buffer zone, which is related to the upgrade of an existing septic system of equivalent capacity. We will be adding a new tank, new septic tank, as well as a septic processor between the 50 and 100-foot buffer zones, which will pump to a new leach field outside of the 100-foot buffer zone. And it's all in red on the plan.
Yep.
I didn't color the buffer zones,
Thank you.
but we show the 25, 50,
Yep.
and 100.
So real quickly, we did confirm those resource area boundaries as correct.
Got it.
Makes a difference to the discussion.
Okay. Everybody happy? Any comments from the public? Nope. And your recommendation on this one?
It is for a positive 2A to confirm the resource area boundaries as shown, and a -3 for allowing for work within the buffer zone that does not require a notice of intent.
Okay. So can I make that recommendation?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that-
I'm recused.
I would say, so that passes unanimously with Commissioner Steinauer recused. Certificates of compliance. Michael O'Mara, 240 Bulphus Road.
All right, this was for a septic system upgrade. This is the one that's been continued for a while. We're waiting for the final sign off from the Board of Health. We've received that sign off, and at this point are recommending the issuance of that certificate of compliance.
Yep.
It was in compliance for us before, but for septic systems, we try to make sure that the
Yeah.
Board of Health certifies what's in the ground, that they say, okay,
Yep.
work together.
That's a sensitive little spot too. Hold this hard. Okay.
Move to issue the cert.
We have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimous. Oh, we got lots of blue shutters, Realty Trust.
Paul, do you want to run through these?
Yeah, okay, I'm confused.
Sure. There's just, I think you guys can take them all at once. Two of them are
Yeah.
for invalid orders of conditions
Like
for no
that.
work that's being done, but I always confuse which ones are which.
Sure.
The blue shutters. Approved unanimous. Approved.
Thank you. For the record, Paul Santos with Nantucket Surveyors, representing the applicant and owner of the subject property, which is 4 Hulbert Avenue. Owner is Blue Shutters Realty Trust. Arthur Reed is also in attendance today. He is the attorney that has represented the entity for some time now. Two of these orders, let's, I guess, go with the 2504. We'll take them one by one, I guess. 2504 is the first one. This is an order that essentially I've called an invalid order of conditions, as we permitted work, in this case, that was not done. It was the enclosing and reconfiguring the existing stairway, building, and so forth. This was a case where we were going to take the existing structure, which was a garage at that time, and renovate it in place. That work was never done. So that's the first 2504. 2555 was to take the original dwelling on the property, which is the larger Blue Shutters property that you're familiar with as you come around the turnaround down on Grant Point. That original structure was going to be elevated to be in compliance with the flood zone regulations. That work was never done. So the only open order was the garage structure that was on the property historically, which is, if you look at the, this is the property here, Blue Shutters is here, the way the turnaround is in this area. This existing structure was further to the south and abutted right up against the wetlands. We picked that building up, slid it away from the wetland, got it as far as we could, which was outside the 25-foot no disturb, and then we provided a restoration area in the area where the dwelling was sitting at that time. So that work has been completed. The restoration area has been restored essentially. David Haynes did an evaluation of that restoration area. It's included in our certificate of compliance request. And the structure itself has received all its, it required special permit from the Zoning Board of Appeals, required some relief from the Planning Board. All those permits have been released as built have been done and submitted. And it was brought into compliance with the flood zone regulations in effect at the time that we did the work. So that is the only really open order that any work was performed, and we're asking for a certificate of compliance for that particular work also. So 2 orders, essentially no work, and then the one, which is 2582, is the actual one for the garage/dwelling.
Okay. Can we do this all at once?
Yes, he explained that far better than I would have, so I'm glad he did. But our site inspections will verify that it is compliance with the permitted work.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I'll put it out for the public too. Any questions from the public? Okay, so this is for the approval of SE 48 2582, 2555, and 2504 at 4 Holbert Ave, Blue Shutters Realty Trust. So I'll make the motion.
There's 3 of them.
Okay. Second? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No, so that passes. They pass all unanimously. Cool. And Pauline Dalton, 8 Shakamo Road.
And the next one, Mr. Chairman. I would recommend taking these 2 together.
Shakamo Road.
It's one of the wolf. They're old. Makes it faster. If you'd like to see it full size. Sure.
Jeff Blackwell for the owner, Pauline Dalton. This is a property where notices of intent were applied for and orders issued back in 2000 and 2002 for some violations to the wetland setbacks, and actually there was a walking path that had been established within the 25-foot setback and also partially within the wetland. The owners at that time, George and Pauline Dalton, George is deceased. For the 2000 order conditions, I would say they had about 80% compliance with that order. The path was abandoned, plantings were performed, and a split rail fence was constructed. And for the most part, they complied with that order conditions, but there is an area of about 500 square feet where the existing split rail fence still encroaches into what was to be the 25-foot no disturb area, or recreation of that area. In 2002, there had been some additional work up the hill within, within the buffer zone or no disturb zone to a coastal bank, and the compliance, the degree of compliance that order conditions was maybe 50%. Split rail fence was installed, but it was not installed far enough away so that the 25-foot setback or disturb buffer was not fully created. The property is for sale and is scheduled to close in early November. And the open expired orders of conditions are, of course, of concern to the buyer. The buyer is fully aware of the situation and has committed to file a notice of intent in 2018, and I have a letter here from the buyer's attorney, Sarah Elger, which acknowledges the issues in the unperformed work from the previous orders and is committed to file notice of intent in 2018 and to perform the work by April 1st to establish the undisturbed buffers and to plant viburnum or high bush blueberry in the, especially in the areas at the top of the coastal bank. It's kind of an odd one. We can't do anything about it because the permits have expired, but everyone is fully informed of the issue, and as I said, the buyers agreed to file notice of intent to remedy the situation. The problem is the two orders are still hanging out there as loose ends. So we would ask you to consider issuing the orders of conditions, and we'll be back before you in a month or so with a filing.
Can I just add?
Oh,
please do.
Well, I just
Sarah.
wanted to say, you know, my clients are not happy about this violation. Obviously, they don't want to buy a property that's in violation. We're supposed to close on Monday, actually, the 22nd. But they want to get off to the right foot in Nantucket. They want to get off to the right foot with this commission. They're going to be coming back, not immediately, but within the next year or so for a fairly major project. So they want to do the right thing. So I just wanted to be sure that you're aware of that. They're not happy about this, and they're happy to take care of it between now and December filing, and then do the work by April.
Well, how do we phrase it so that they have the legal obligation to come back, but we allow them to go forward to close?
Well, I think they'd be subject to an enforcement order, wouldn't they?
Correct.
Yeah, I think we just have to hold that over their head, right? That if we don't see them by that state, then they're going to get a letter.
It's a little bit tricky because, so the way we write orders now, we have a very, I know we always skip it when we talk about additional conditions, but we always have a very purposeful condition in there that states that everyone always has to follow the project submission and plans and protocols and waiver requests that they submitted, because when we get into these situations where an order's been expired, in these cases for 16 and 18 years, or excuse me, no, it's 3 less, so 15 and 13 years, that you can have that as an ongoing condition and then just require that work to be done, which is a bit of a stretch. This is one where we in 2000 and 2002, we hadn't gotten that smart yet. So we don't have provisions like that built into orders to do here. So we're stuck in a sense where you're trying to remedy something that should have been taken care of 15 years ago that was not. They don't have a current order to go out there and simply relocate the fence because they don't have a permit to do it. I mean, you're a little bit of a leap of faith, but it's something where we're kind of stuck in a bit of a rock and a hard place. So I know when I talked to Jeff about it at length because we went out and did another inspection out there and said, I told that I didn't feel comfortable telling you guys that it was in compliance because it clearly is not. So what do we do? And it's something where in some cases you could simply invalidate the order of conditions, but work did start and work did occur, and some of the work that did occur, like abandoning the path, is in compliance. So you're kind of in this murky area. I'm not overly thrilled about it, but I appreciate the effort that's made to rectify the issue and feel more comfortable about getting rid of orders that no one can do any action under.
Yep.
Knowing that they'll be back and are knowingly subject to enforcement if they don't come back, provides a certain level of comfort to that. Also knowing that if they're going to do any work to the structures, they're going to have to be back anyways. It's a very imperfect situation.
Was the split rail fence, so the split rail fence was put in to denote the 25? Or the purpose of it was to denote the 25?
In portions, yes. And then as we looked at some of the aerial photos, it looks like some of the spots where it went in where it should have been in more advanced areas, it ended up following some of the brush lines that were in place. And I think that's where some of it went askew. I mean,
Well, yeah, I guess I'm getting at it. Was it did the wetland flagging? This is a new wetland flagging I'm looking at right here. So was something not?
No.
Oh, okay.
This
That's the
is
original with the.
wetland
Okay,
flagging
gotcha.
from
Correct.
2000.
When this was.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So you're comparing.
Good. Yeah, I was looking. I was wondering if there's two different.
so if a new application comes in, there is also potential that those wetland lines may have also changed. I doubt a coastal bank in that area that doesn't erode has changed.
Yeah.
Unless it's by slope in some spots, but I don't believe it is. That it could fluctuate.
There could be
If you
some
look-
slight changes. Yeah.
Perhaps.
So.
That's why we put it in front of you guys to decide what you guys want to do. But that's kind of the, and then kind of the whole story.
Well, we're gonna hold Sarah to it.
We know she
I know. I believe me, I know. You know, my impression is that the Daltons, both of whom are deceased at this point, kind of did whatever they wanted. I don't know if you've been to the property, but
Right.
it had a lot of unique features. So
Yeah, it's
I
interesting.
think it's going to be a different
Keeps the fire
time
toes.
down there.
Yeah, I
All I
think
can think is where's the new pool?
Right. So I mean, so obviously.
outside of the 50-foot
Yes,
setback. That's where it's going to be. But yeah, I was going to add to that too. Is Mrs. Dalton died in January, which I think is what
That's what
is moving this along.
precipitated this.
Yeah.
Right. So now it's like in a family trust or something. Yes.
It's coming out of the estate. And they're in Wisconsin.
Gotcha.
Not an easy scenario.
Yeah, this doesn't look like it.
It's actually, I will say, not to be awful, but going on the site inspections there, it's kind of one of those spots where like the bird feeders have fallen over. There's a lawn, and it's just kind of at the point where it's clearly no one is maintaining it anymore, or really spending. I mean, the grass has been mowed, but
Well, it's not
I wouldn't say an effort to maintain it is really in place at this point. So
right. So the best chance of compliance here does seem to be this approach, closing this out.
yeah.
Yeah. General feeling?
Yeah.
I think I don't see what else we can do. I mean,
I would say this is the first time that someone, as part of the compliance request, has ever submitted a letter that's essentially obligating them to enforcement, and willingly doing it as someone who has had no involvement with the property and really doesn't even until Monday.
Right.
Things are signed. So,
So is it a posthumous 2A? Is that what you're going to get?
no, this is no two-way this time, Ian. This is just a issuing of the certificate of compliance.
Okay.
Requests for determinations are the two ways.
Is that for
For both of them?
Yes,
Yeah.
for both.
Okay. So, unless there's any other questions, then
We're gonna hold you to it.
we are.
Do you think we can do this on an RDA, or do you want a full notice when we come back?
I think we want a full notice just because there'll probably be required monitoring that goes with it to ensure that it takes place.
Okay.
It might get lost in the. Okay.
That's fine. We'll be back anyway, so we'll see a lot of us.
Okay.
Always a
So,
pleasure.
so how about it?
Let's hope. Let's hope it's.
Someone like to make a motion for 8 Shockmore Road for SE 48 1561
So moved.
and 1389?
Issue those certs.
Okay, do we have a second? Any seconds? Going once?
second,
Two.
You're welcome.
All in favor? Any opposed?
Last minute work.
Good. That one passes unanimously. They pass unanimously. Francis M. and IVC Sricia.
All right, so this was for a
Quick up.
residential
Quick up.
redevelopment at 155 Clackamas Road. It was for the redo of some structures and construction of a couple additional on a pool. Sorry, my notes back into the other folder, and it's on time. What I have for this, the site is in compliance. But that being said, I'll just grab my notes.
Okay.
Correct, we didn't have any conditions that were ongoing
Right.
on this application.
Okay. We have a motion to approve
Issue.
for issue.
Second.
All those in favor? Any opposed? Passed unanimously. Swains Point Nominee Trust, 262 Bulbous Road.
This is one of my favorites. This was the application, if you guys remember, they permitted the construction on a portion of the bridge that they redid, and then they had to come back to amend the permit to include
Public access.
the public access
I love
component for their Chapter 91 permit.
Yeah.
That's there. I would say that the stairs and pathways are in, and they have the little public access signs on the bridge. And I would say that it's in compliance, and if you guys ever find your way up that creek, feel free to walk around.
Get out and walk around.
I'm sure Peter Brace has probably used it multiple times.
That's right.
But it's one of those great public access projects that no one will probably ever use, but they're in place with the signs.
The
So
whole purpose of the thing was to enable Peter to come.
Yeah, to go into the bridge.
now we just go around.
I want to see that.
It's just kind of awesome. It's literally like a stairway, a little stairway to nowhere. It like just goes up and around, and you're like, that's great. Thanks for putting
fall
those
off the
in.
bridge. You
So,
gotta get out of the water.
I'm sure whoever's going to take possession of that property, or whoever has, they have kids and grandkids. Those stairs will get a lot of use for minnow fishing and everything else they can pick up from that.
That's what they do these days.
It's very cool.
Okay. We have a motion to issue.
A little jealous.
Move to issue.
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? No, passed unanimously.
Thank you.
Very good, thanks. Words and conditions.
All right, I have drafted a bunch, but we didn't do a bunch because I had time.
Glad we're here, 'cause I'm at 10%.
All right, take one and pass them on.
The dreaded stable.
Sorry, we had a few too many. Those I had drafted and brought that same order for this coastal stabilization that we ended up having to move for national heritage, but I had time to put it together, so I did. And as soon as those go in, it pretty much blows out the staple estate one. At least two. But the first one, if you guys don't remember, I can get out the plans, was 235 Nantucket Road. That was David Haynes' project for the pool and the compensatory storage for the flood zone that we had talked about.
We had something about a retaining wall.
There was a retaining wall as part of that project.
They're creating their own.
It became their own bank.
Yeah, that became a bank when they constructed it. So I will say, I did send an email to some folks at DEP to ask about that very issue about constructing retaining walls like that, or foundation walls and things. And I got back a message that was like, I hadn't thought of that. So they said they would talk about it and get back to me with what exactly. And I was like, oh, because the way it reads right now, and I got the little bit of the head scratch, and maybe they may have to fix some language to make some points of clarity about how it works, because bulkheads technically count because they're man-made. So that is in the works for how that is going to look. So this may be one of those where they got caught up in the language, and we'll see how it plays out, because I don't think their intention is to say that, your house down in the Brent Point neighborhood that's in the flood zone, you've created
Thank you for creating a coastal bank.
8 different coastal banks or one coastal bank, and do those things, and if you really are persnickety about it. So they have some provisions in it already, but they may need to adjust it a little bit. But we'll see. We'll see what they come back with. But I wanted to at least ask them, because I can't imagine someone else hasn't sent that into them before. But I thought I'd kick the tires. That being said, had our normal pool stuff in there. I just memorialized which compensatory storage area.
Right, because the other one.
Because the other one had the cedars in it. And you guys had said no. I included the no cultivar provision in there. I don't know if anyone had anything else. I don't need to go through it completely.
Well, but I don't think so.
Move to approve as drafted.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That one passes unanimously.
There's always think of it. Goof.
No, this time.
I will redeem myself later, I'm sure. Alright, we closed 72 Millbrook, but I did not draft an order for that because we didn't have a file number for that until like 402. So that was just for the pool on Millbrook. Did anyone have any conditions outside of the normal that they can think of right now? They'll have another chance at it in 3 weeks. But we'll have to issue it on that day, so.
Oh, some form of infiltration around the bluestone.
Oh, that is correct.
Right. With the porous around.
Yeah.
You mentioned.
Realistic.
All right.
Got a lot of pools in my neighborhood. It's like,
Do you want me to put a condition in that Andy Bennett shall have the ability to access your pool for a swim at any point?
especially without fences, my God, it's gonna be
Now
so
you're
much
the one who
easier,
wants to
man.
monitor to make sure they're not just dumping it in the
Right.
Just don't dive in on top of that cover.
That's
It's
right.
gone, you know. That's
I can see it.
I think there's no
I'll have to check out that cover.
There's no fences. It's
Crazy. Can't even.
All right. Diane Lincoln.
Okay.
Not to keep it moving, but keep it moving.
No, okay. Keep it real.
Move to approve is drafted.
Second.
All those in favor? Any opposed? That one passes unanimously.
Betting 1,000.
Pool again, Nantucket Point in View.
Easy.
Point of View, I like that. LLC 9 Lincoln Ave.
Oh, that's easy.
Lincoln Ave Pool. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah, there wasn't anything on this.
Nothing on that one.
I would have stayed Diane Lincoln.
Yeah, we just did that.
Oh, no, we did the.
We're doing.
This is
We did
Willard. This
70.
is the one that we talked about, structure for structure change.
Oh, yeah, the porch and the. No, I thought we did. Okay, never mind. Oh, I see your point. Okay.
Keep passing that if you
Yeah,
say
yeah,
that
yeah, I
now.
got it, because you didn't have it. Focus. Okay.
We can,
Yes,
we're
it's
on
Bel
the,
Air.
we're on the
You still need
structure
to
for
sign
structure.
Oh, I got, I know.
Others,
I'll
right?
sign it, sign it.
Just got Nancy.
You're not kidding, man.
You don't want it to get lost.
I can't
Sometimes
just sit there.
Amy has been known to get sticky fingers.
Does he
Alright.
say
No, no. Sometimes I get lost in the office too, I understand.
Never. You want to tell
Man.
Joanne that she loses them? Good luck to you.
Okay.
It's been nice knowing you.
Okay, so the Bel Air Nominee Trust, 9 Willard Street.
Well, we were talking about Pier Foundation. Can we continue that?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a
Sure,
conditional.
we can add a,
All construction materials that are being used.
yeah, you can put a condition in 20 that, the new living space shall be on a pier foundation.
Mhm.
Yeah. That should be fun.
And then if it changes for whatever reason, they have to come back to amend that or modify that one.
Do you want to do runoff into some sort of French drains or something? I mean, there's obviously too shallow for infiltrators.
You know, I keep coming back to down here. It's like,
Where is it?
this kind of spreads out
Yeah.
massively.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost better in some ways, I think, unless it's running over
Mhm.
fertilized lawn. I guess. What do you think?
I don't know.
What do you think, Ashley?
I mean, I think in these locations, we need to start doing like some small green roof solutions, stormwater planters on the top deck, you know, to hold some stuff truly on site. But I don't think that infiltrators do anything.
No,
I
that's
mean,
what I mean. I was just
a
thinking
week
of.
ago, there's video of the tide
Right.
coming up and water just bubbling
Yep.
through a road downtown. So
Of
I
course,
mean,
well, that's that's the
they
extreme.
just add more material that the water needs to get around
The only
underground.
thing I could see is like having a down spot that gets it out of the 50, that gives a little more distance, but then how far you
Yeah.
run it away.
I know.
from it.
And
Well, I
it's
mean, as
still
their
all
wetland
flood
keeps
zone.
growing and growing down there, it's just they're all shooting themselves in the foot anyway, so.
I think it's a waste of time. Infiltrating.
Yeah, I did too.
Yeah, no, I wasn't thinking
Yeah,
of
yeah,
full
but
infiltration,
lower
infiltration,
infiltrate
but-
too.
No.
Yeah. Okay. So,
One second, I actually have a significant amendment to this one, because I just noticed that I forgot to fix the waiver. If you guys feel that it needs a waiver, it is technically structure within the 50 that's pre-existing, but
I don't want to grant that waiver. With that.
you can simply say that it doesn't require a waiver, and that's up to you. But if you did have a waiver, I would say that I think you would have it read something like, the commission finds that the project as, there's the fun stuff that lists what the waiver is too, but the commission finds that the project as proposed, given the historic site conditions and with the structure-to-structure conversion with no expansion to the footprint, will not have an adverse impact to the resource area. The commission finds in addition that there are no reasonable alternatives to let the project proceed in compliance with the regulations, and then you would grant the waiver under A. So I think how it would read.
Yeah.
I think since they are doing work in the 50, we should have a waiver on it. I mean, even though if we're gonna allow it, but they are doing work.
that's a good point.
It is kind of tricky because it is essentially, it's a structure to a structure. But
Well, it's clear we need to, when we finally get around to changing some of our regulations, that we need to redefine structure in such a way that we can avoid this going forward.
We need to have, I think, like runoff coefficients with some of these other things we're putting.
Andy, the pressure is on you as the chairman.
Yeah, you're gonna hate me. Okay.
Well, you could simply just set a date to
Christmas break.
to start.
Before 2022.
Well, could we go somewhere and do it, like up north or something?
Now, unfortunately, you have to still do it as a regulatory changes aren't public hearings.
Ah,
Sorry.
I don't think tons of excited people are gonna be like,
You know what? I'll say right now.
There'll be a few.
If you guys have a regulatory
Where would you
hearing
guys
for
like to
regulatory
go?
changes, Art will be here. Emily will be
Have a
here.
consensus where we can
Paul
all
will
go
probably
together.
be here.
I know.
Depending on what you're covering, that may be the bulk of your crowd. Historically, that's about
We're
what
getting
it
off
is.
track here, guys.
I know we
Issue
are.
as amended.
Yep. Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that passes with Commissioner Arisman and Golding opposed. Okay, Michael S., Christina Elizabeth Jemison,
I didn't draft anything else for tonight, but
Hummock
happy
Pond.
to discuss some of this. That's the Hummock Pond Road one. I think we talked about what we're looking condition-wise at that pretty
Yeah.
well at length. They get a pretty good feel for what that is. And we did we close it? We did.
Yeah, we
So
did.
we will be issuing it in 3 weeks. I'll have 3 weeks to write that up. I'll met with the neighbor to figure his situation out in between the two.
Okay. Extension orders of conditions. Susan Listerlock, 34B Grove Lane. Yeah.
Thank you. Paul Santos, Nantucket Surveyors, on behalf of the applicant and property owner Susan Listerlock. This is an order of conditions that goes back some time, that is still valid through the permit life and the Permit Extension Act. It's a piece of property that Susan Listerlock owns. If any of you know Susan, she owns a jewelry store downtown. She lives down the end of Grove Lane, the wet end of Grove Lane, if there's not a dry end. It's a pretty unique piece of property in that this is one where the majority of her yard is lawn, but it's wetland. So we did go through a lot of time and effort to get this notice of intent. And at the time, it was a permit for a small workshop, shed workshop, and so forth for Susie to create on the property. She has yet to do that. for financial reasons, but we'd like to try to extend the permit for one more year, as we're now talking about maybe instead of doing the standalone workshop, renovating the existing dwelling itself and staying within, trying maybe within the footprint with an expansion of the existing dwelling. But she's just not sure yet what she can or can't do. So I'm asking for a 1-year extension to the permit to keep the permit alive. There was a lot of work done to get to that point, and then maybe come back or not come back and with a different proposal than the standalone workshop and shed. So we're asking for a 1-year extension to the project.
Just out of curiosity, was that? I can't remember this one, but is there a structure already there?
No.
So
no,
that's odd.
No, they did kind of prep the site to kind of start work, so they do qualify for the extension. But.
And the revegetation area in the driveway, they've kind of let that go rather than mowing it. So there's been some, not a great amount, but there has been a little bit of work done on the site.
No, I would say they've completed most of the permit with the exception of the buildings themselves, or at least in the works of. I will contest though, it is a squishy site.
Yeah.
There's wetland flags right at the corner of
I was about to say
dwelling.
the curious.
And that's the lawn area. That's that area. Like that's all lawn. That's lawn. When you go through with that area there, like I said, it's
not that sometimes out of school.
There's
One
no
of
place
the
to go.
times
That's
we
an
were
approach.
there, was standing in the middle of the lawn, and I looked down and I realized I was glad I had my boots on because my feet were
sinking.
wet. And I was like, all right, it's time to move because I'm sinking in. Let's get going.
Yeah, and I'm not too convinced that if we let the permit expire and we try to come back and do this again, that the outcome would be the same. So I'd like to try to, it's like I said, 1 year I think gives her a little time to decide what she wants to really do out here, if anything.
Okay.
So that's the request.
Move to grant the 1-year extension.
Okay. Good. Second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That one passes unanimously. Very good. Other biz. Approval of minutes. Everyone loves the minutes.
Well, no, I don't.
Oh.
Oh, yeah.
Because doesn't it say it took place Wednesday, October 19th?
Yeah, there was a date.
Terry,
Which one?
It says proposed minutes.
For the regular meeting or the SBPF?
Ah.
I think it's the.
I think I corrected
It's
it.
the
I got a
SBPF.
message on that from
Okay.
Joanne and I corrected it.
Okay.
You don't have a corrected
Okay.
copy.
Okay.
All right.
So that was corrected, but you might still wanna do it as an
I would still make the motion.
I'm always impressed. I will. Someone like to make a motion to approve? I will make a motion.
It's like
to
our
approve.
first, catch.
I was about to say,
in like
no one-
4 years on Terry's minutes, so.
At
we might as well
MPDC, there's
memorialize
always
that we
somebody
actually
commenting
paying
on the
attention
minutes.
enough
but
to
going to this
catch it.
board.
I moved issue as amended then.
Ah, very good.
Second.
Second. All's in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good. Okay, monitoring reports.
Nothing we had.
No monitoring reports. Excellent. Enforcement actions.
All right, so.
Where's your
I'm
favorite?
recusing myself.
Me too.
But I'm
Me
gonna-
Okay.
Wait, so
Go ahead.
Ian recused, Ernie, you're sitting this out too?
I'm sitting it out.
And Ben, did you say you are too?
No, I think I can, well, I have worked on Marcia's property in the past, but I have no relationship with her other than.
Do you still have any financial interest? Yeah. Then
I think
you should be fine.
it's-
If you
yeah.
feel uncomfortable about it,
No.
you can do it, but then we get into
Yeah,
quarantine issues.
I don't.
We have to wait for Dave to get back.
Yeah.
So what do you guys want to do? I will tell you, she emailed me this week and said that she was putting some grass seed in a spot where her mower had torn up. That being said, that kind of tells me that
We need some wetland lines.
work is clearly going to continue on that lot.
Yeah, that
until-
area was.
I think we just gotta give Marcia a roadmap.
Yes.
What she can do, Doesn't have to be, doesn't have to be contentious, I think we just need to.
Kind of give her direction here.
Yeah. give her
So is that,
direction.
so what would you guys like that to include? Because I can certainly draft a letter and I can bring it with for Monday's SBPF hearing. We can just knock it out at the end, so it doesn't linger for 3 weeks. So what pieces would you guys want to see, or
All right,
what
so-
would be the markers on said roadmap?
the markers of
I
the
think
Wetland
we need a
delineation.
wetland
Wetland
delineation.
delineation.
Because there's no way to direct her
Yeah.
on what she can do to the property going forward without that delineation.
Right.
Right.
I would say that would be kind of keeping in our past practice where
Yeah.
we typically
Yeah.
require
So we can
delineations.
develop guidelines for her.
Is there anything else you want to see?
Do we need a time frame on
Well-
that?
Well, I think
No,
if
we
you
look-
leave it open-ended.
No,
gonna
are you
turn out
looking
to
for a
perhaps-
date of the imposing of fines? Is that what we're thinking?
Well, I think you set a date for the filing to be.
Yeah.
And
No.
then say anything beyond a certain date, you'll be subject to financial penalty if that's,
Mhm.
I mean, you guys have the ability to essentially fine $50 a day to do it, so. I would set the date, obviously, within reason. I mean, we have a filing
Right.
deadline for Friday. If you were to issue out this letter today, I don't think you can say it has to be by Friday. 'Cause that's just, it's not feasible.
Yeah.
But you guys can think about the day. And then with that, is there anything else you'd like to see as a part of this?
Well, it's interesting with that pond being drained completely. You can really tell what kind of a base it has.
Part of me feels like we almost need a maintenance plan from her to say, these are the standard maintenance things I've been doing year after year, and anything outside of that would be work on my property. Like, try and figure out what she means by her regular maintenance.
Right, what she needs to do.
And what are those steps specifically? Like, does she drain it? Does she like?
Right, because the photos that the office has and that we've seen tell me a little bit of a different story than we heard
right
here. So I'd just
So,
like to know.
keeping in mind too, I mean, not for nothing, that even if the pond technically isn't a resource area pond, and there's BVW that surrounds the pond,
within-
that's still
within our jurisdiction.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it still would essentially
Right.
be within the 25-foot undisturbed buffer zone, and even if it's maintenance of a water feature to remove vegetation from that's naturally occurring or growing, it would still be removal of vegetation within the 25-foot buffer zone. I know that's, if it were anywhere else or something going on, that would require some level of permitting or documentation of that activity to make it normalized to the regulations.
Mm-hmm.
Although we feel like we can give her a management plan, that would be.
Well, she has to come to
No, I know, but I think
Well,
we
I
need to
think
get-
Well-
we both need to kind of meet in the middle.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
We do
Yeah,
one,
we're-
she doesn't want.
Well, I think you could simply set a date and just say, that the current site conditions can be maintained with the lawn area and the planting areas that are there as of the certain date. And any other alterations to the site will require, depending on the delineations, the proper filing. I mean, that's the thing is, some of it may be work in a resource area, some of it may be buffer zone work, and we don't really know. But I think if you set that forth and you kind of set the current conditions and what's expected and what's been going on, but I mean, I think you're looking at a site that just in the last 3 or 4 years that we've been kind of in that neighborhood, there have been a tree removed, at least 3 cedars removed from the property that we noted when we were doing the soils work there, and a number of other activities on the property and up into the house. And then work on the house obviously could potentially be in the buffer zone as well. So, and now that their next door neighbors also have wetland up to the property line, I would say all of that's within their buffer zone as well. So I think that's something that's just gonna be understanding that, well, you may think you can just, I'm gonna go plant a tree or plant a shrub, that takes permits to do now because you're within jurisdictional areas. So, all right.
I think,
If I can say something as a member of the public, I think Marcia would like to do some wetland planting around the edge of the pond. She mentioned the rose mallow and some things like that to Because I think she'd like to plant some wetland type vegetation to sort of help siphon some of that water out of the yard.
I would say, so I think to answer that, it's pretty simple, that I think something that would be included in this letter would be something that would essentially be planting vegetation within a resource area, and that would require permits to do and be subject to the same monitoring and cultivar provisions and those kinds of things you would be expecting in a vegetated wetland situation. So I think some of that would have to be included if that's the direction you guys are looking to go.
And as a member of the public, I might add.
State your name.
Me too.
Surrounded by the public.
Yeah, but if she cites any anti-aircraft guns to shoot down drones, please put them outside the 100-foot line and aiming away from my house.
And we encourage her to shoot down drones.
I mean, I talked to Seth about the drone issue, and he said technically you cannot fly a drone over somebody's property without their permission.
Right.
But getting that enforced is virtually impossible.
Yeah.
If you do call the police though, they'll come out and they'll stand by you. Like they'll go to the other property and say, don't do that anymore.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. Because we've had problems.
Well, like all of these things, you have to report them.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
All right. So I think I have an idea, and I'll try to draft it up so we have that on Monday of next week, and we'll just do that quickly at the end. I don't think it'll take very long. I'll get it. I'll try to circulate it in advance too, so everyone has at least the weekend to take a look at it. Okay. So you're not reading it cold, but I think it can be pretty short and to the point.
I just tell her that number 8 birdshot works wonders.
They actually sell drone guns.
Drone guns.
Yeah, like capture it.
Does this require
a net thing?
It's a netting thing.
Yeah.
Does this require a vote or anything?
No, you guys are just simply giving me instructions.
Okay.
It's not taking any action on this.
Apparently the military has a gun that interferes with the radio communication, just shuts them off, and they
They just die. That would be great to do like over the water when they're flying.
Remington
like,
has great shotguns too.
Unfortunately, it interferes with your cell phone and your Wi-Fi signal as well. But if you're willing to sacrifice that for a few minutes,
check the military. I'm sure they'll
We're fun to shoot at one
It's
though.
temporary.
We need some trained raptors to get after them.
Oh, we can work on that one. Okay, reports.
CPC, we've listened to all the presentations, and the haggling begins next week. We'll keep you posted.
MPDC, we haven't had a meeting for a while. Great. Mosquito control?
Done for the season.
Done for the season. Okay.
No more.
No other committees. Commissioner comments?
Yeah,
we
we've got
really
to
got to
get
get these regulations.
I know we do. We just got to remember all these things that we thought about for
I
these
think
regulars.
let's get SPPF done first.
Definitely.
I'll go add some of these to my list.
Nasty rainy day.
Thank you.
Should be good.
It's one of those things is we get fired up about it, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, let's wait until like
And then we forget all the.
SPPF finishes up.
Yeah,
Because
well,
we
we
have more
almost
time.
need
and
to
then-
say right when SPPF finishes up, the special meetings start for this. Because we need to make it a priority or it won't happen.
Okay. Administrative staff reports?
No.
No, great. Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
I don't want to
I want to stay late.
I know, sorry about that. A little bit traveling on here.
You're always welcome to stay longer.
I know.
Thank you, Terry, as always.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Terry.
Did Joe get a hold of you today, Andy? Andy, did
What?
Joanne get a hold of you today?
No.
She's just gonna ask, we also got a request, for an extension, on an order that she just wanted to see if it was okay if we just took care of it on Monday. That's what I said. I said, but check with him.
Yeah, okay.
He's technically the chair.
Yeah, okay.
And if he says no,
Let
then
me
it
think
gets
about that.
moved. It's one that the
Just this one time. Or any other time.
Thanks.
She and I agree, and I've told you guys before that I try to at least have one thing on the agenda after the public hearing. So the room can kind of filter out a little bit and get out of there.
I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
I mean, it makes
thought
a
from
big
you
use of
guys.
the time
Did
anyway.
you get my thumb drive?
I did. Joe had it on the desk today.
Need a rider?
Who's thumb drive? And she said that
Oh, okay.
she
Was
was
it supposed to rain
loading
tonight?
the stuff
Yeah.
onto
Oh.
the website this afternoon. She's getting it downloaded. It's bigger than
Got room in your truck, I know,
Takes
you
some
got some
time to
wood
load
back
up.
there and stuff.
I wasn't gonna
so I'll
put you in
check
the
with
back.
her. I left it.
My bike out there.
Oh, you got your bike. Yeah, I mean,
So
it's not
3 to
anything that can't be weighed on. I don't think there's anything.
Back of their bike. That's not gonna phase them.
No, I won't make you sit there with the bike.
Yes. No, but when you load them onto our website and then you set them to publish and do those things, that it just our website is not the swiftest. Gotcha. I mean that in the very most nicest way for our website, but it's not.
They just updated it.
They did, but it's just one like if you're uploading anything of some size, is it you first load it into the system and then it loads into the area of the system that you need to do it in, and you have to do it kind of one at a time. So I'm sure it's done.
Okay, because otherwise I could have, I thought making it a PDF would be easier for
Oh, it does.
individual JPEGs.
Oh no, individual JPEGs always take longer. So because it's one of the things where then you end up doing if your PDF has